Millionaire finds a blind little beggar at the edge of a cliff. What he decides to do is shocking. The headlights of Alexander Richmond's Bentley pierced through the thick mountain mist like dull blades, barely illuminating the treacherous road ahead. His weathered hands gripped the leather steering wheel tighter as he navigated another sharp turn, the wheels of his luxury vehicle inches away from the steep precipice that dropped into darkness. At 65, Alexander had everything money could buy, and nothing that truly mattered. The vast emptiness of his mansion awaited him, its halls filled with priceless art that no one ever admired, its rooms echoing with a silence that grew more, deafening with each passing year. The quarterly board meeting had dragged on longer than usual, filled with fake smiles and hidden daggers. He was used to it, the whispers behind his back, the barely concealed contempt in their eyes. They called him the mountain recluse now, the eccentric billionaire who rarely left his fortress of solitude except for essential business matters. Let them talk, he thought. Their words meant nothing to him anymore. The fog thickened suddenly, forcing him to slow down. The radio crackled with static before dying completely, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the soft purr of the engine. His mind wandered, as it often did on these solitary drives, to Elizabeth. 15 years had passed since she left this world, yet her absence felt as raw as ever. A flash of movement caught his eye, something pale and small through the mist. Alexander blinked, unsure if his tired mind was playing tricks on him. But there it was again, a small figure standing precariously close to the edge of the cliff. "Good God!" he exclaimed, slamming on the brakes. The Bentley's tires screamed against the wet asphalt, the vehicle coming to a halt mere yards from where he'd spotted the apparition. Without thinking, Alexander threw open his door and rushed out into the cold mountain air. The fog swirled around him as he approached the cliff's edge, his Italian leather shoes slipping on the wet gravel. And there, through the shifting curtain, curved mist, he saw her, a little girl no more than 7 or 8 years old, swaying dangerously close to the abyss. She wore a tattered dress that might once have been white, her dark hair tangled and wild around her small face. But what struck Alexander most was her vacant stare. Her eyes, though open, seemed to see nothing at all. "Don't move," he called. Out, his voice hoarse with fear. The girl turned her head slightly at the sound but made no other movement. As he drew closer, he could see her feet were bare and covered in dirt, her skin pale as moonlight. Time seemed to slow as he watched. Her sway again, her small body tilting backward toward the endless drop. Without hesitation, Alexander lunged forward, his arms wrapping around her tiny frame just as she began to fall. The momentum carried them both backward, away from the edge, and they tumbled onto the wet ground. For several long moments, Alexander lay there, his heart pounding in his chest, the child clutched protectively against him. She didn't struggle or cry out. She remained eerily still in his arms. "Are you hurt?" he asked, carefully sitting up and helping her to do the same. The girl didn't respond. Her blank eyes stared through him as if he weren't there at all. It was then that Alexander noticed something glinting at her neck, a silver medallion hanging from a delicate chain. With trembling fingers, he reached out to examine it, and his blood ran cold. There, engraved in elegant script he would recognize anywhere, was a name he hadn't spoken aloud in 15 years. Elizabeth Richmond. The medallion was impossible. He had buried it with his wife. Yet here it was, hanging around the neck of this mysterious child who had appeared out of nowhere on a deserted mountain road. "Who are you?" he whispered. But the girl remained silent, her unseeing eyes fixed on some distant point beyond his shoulder. A gust of wind whipped around them, carrying with it the promise of rain. Alexander looked back at his car, then at the child, knowing he couldn't leave her here alone. Without another word, he gathered her in his arms and carried her to the Bentley. As he settled her into the passenger seat, she turned her head slightly, and for a moment, he could have sworn. She smiled, a smile so familiar it made his chest ache. The fog continued to swirl around them, as Alexander carefully turned the car around, heading toward his estate. In the seat beside him, the girl sat motionless, the impossible medallion gleaming in the dashboard lights, while questions multiplied, in his mind like shadows at dusk. The gates of Richmond Estate opened silently, as Alexander's Bentley approached, their wrought-iron designs casting strange shadows in the car's headlights. Mrs. Peterson, his longtime housekeeper, was already waiting at the main entrance, her usually composed face betraying concern at this unusual late-night arrival. "Mr. Richmond, I was getting worried." She stopped mid-sentence as Alexander emerged from the car, carefully lifting the mysterious child in his arms. "Oh, my word, who is she?" "I found her on Mountain Pass Road," Alexander explained, carrying the girl up the granite steps. "She nearly fell from the cliff. She hasn't spoken a word, and I believe—" He hesitated. "I believe she's blind." Mrs. Peterson quickly opened the heavy oak doors, her efficient nature taking over. "I'll prepare the blue guest room immediately. The poor dear looks half frozen." As they climbed the grand staircase, the girl's head turned slowly, as if she were listening to something. Her small hand reached out, fingers trailing along the mahogany banister with surprising precision. "Third floor," she whispered, her voice so soft Alexander almost missed it. "Elizabeth's favorite view." He nearly stumbled on the steps. The blue room was indeed on the third floor, and it had been Elizabeth's favorite because of its view of the gardens. But how could this child possibly know that? Mrs. Peterson returned with warm clothes and hot chocolate, her motherly instincts in full force. As she helped the girl change out of her wet dress, she gasped, "Mr. Richmond, you need to see this." Around the child's neck, the medallion caught the light and Mrs. Peterson's face went pale. That's Mrs. Richmond's locket. I remember the day you gave it to her." "Impossible," Alexander muttered, though he had seen it himself. That locket was buried with Elizabeth. The girl sat quietly on the edge of the bed, her blank eyes somehow seeming to follow their movements. When Mrs. Peterson tried to remove the medallion, the child clutched it protectively. "The roses are dying," she said suddenly, her voice carrying an odd clarity. "Elizabeth always said you had to prune them in March, or they wouldn't bloom properly." Alexander felt the room spin slightly. The roses had indeed been Elizabeth's passion. She had personally tended the garden until her final days, and she had always insisted on March pruning, though every gardener had disagreed with her timing. "How do you know these things?" he asked, kneeling before the girl. "Please tell me your name." Instead of answering, she reached out with surprising accuracy and touched his face. Her small fingers traced the lines around his eyes, and for a moment her blank stare seemed to soften. "You stopped smiling," she said quietly. She wouldn't have wanted that. Mrs. Peterson made a small sound, somewhere between a gasp and a... Sir Alexander felt something crack inside his carefully maintained composure. No one, not even his closest associates, had ever dared mention how Elizabeth's passing had changed him. I'll call Dr. Matthews," Mrs. Peterson said, her voice shaking slightly. "She should be examined." As the housekeeper hurried from the room, Alexander remained kneeling before the mysterious child. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the windows with an urgent melody. The girl turned her head toward the sound. "There's a storm coming," she said, but something in her tone suggested she wasn't talking about the weather. Alexander watched as she slipped under the covers, her movements deliberate and sure, despite her apparent blindness. The medallion caught the light once more, and he found himself reaching for it again, needing to confirm its reality. As his fingers touched the cool silver, the girl spoke once more, her words sending a chill down his spine. "The safe behind the painting," she changed the combination to your wedding date. "There are things you need to see." Alexander stumbled backward, his heart racing. The safe behind Elizabeth's portrait, he hadn't opened it since her passing, and he had never told anyone, not even Mrs. Peterson, about Elizabeth's habit of changing the combination to meaningful dates. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the room for a brief moment. In that flash of brightness, the girl's face seemed to transform, her features arranging themselves into an expression so familiar it stole his breath away. Standing in the doorway watching this scene unfold, Mrs. Peterson clutched her phone tightly. Dr. Matthews was already on his way, but she wondered if any medical examination could explain what was happening in this room. As if reading her thoughts, the girl turned her blind eyes toward the housekeeper and smiled, a smile that made Mrs. Peterson's knees go weak. It was Elizabeth's smile, down to the small dimple on the right cheek. Dr. Matthews arrived at Richmond Estate just before midnight, his medical bag clutched tightly in his weathered hands. The old doctor had been the family physician for over 3 decades, trusted with secrets that went far beyond medical conditions. As he followed Mrs. Peterson up the grand staircase, his thoughts drifted to Elizabeth Richmond and the mysteries that had surrounded her final days. The girl sat exactly where Alexander had left her, perched on the edge of the blue room's bed, her unseeing eyes fixed on the window. Dr. Matthews approached carefully, noting her unusual stillness. "Hello, young lady," he said softly, setting his bag down. "I'm Dr. Matthews. Would you mind if I examined you?" The child turned her head slightly, and a small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "You still carry peppermints in your left pocket, doctor. Elizabeth always said they made your medicine taste less bitter." The doctor froze, his hand instinctively touching his left pocket where, indeed, he kept peppermints, a habit he'd developed decades ago to help nervous patients. But he hadn't offered candy to a patient in years, not since— "Alexander," Dr. Matthews called out, his voice trembling slightly. "A word, please." In the hallway, the doctor's professional composure cracked. "That medallion she's wearing, I remember the day you commissioned it. Custom made in Florence with that unique engraving style. But more than that, what she just said about the peppermints, only Elizabeth knew about that. She used to tease me about it during her appointments." Alexander ran a hand through his silver hair. "She knows things, Doctor. Things about Elizabeth, about the house, about us. Things she couldn't possibly know." "Let me examine her," Dr. Matthews said, straightening his shoulders. "There might be a medical explanation for her condition." The examination revealed more questions than answers. The girl's blindness appeared to be caused by some form of chemical exposure. Deliberate, Dr. Matthews suspected, though he kept this thought to himself for now. Her physical health was surprisingly good for someone who had apparently been wandering alone, but there was something else that troubled the doctor deeply. "Her reactions, her mannerisms," he whispered to Alexander as they watched the child sleep. "They're not just similar to Elizabeth's, they're identical. The way she tilts her head when listening, the small gesture she makes with her left hand when she's thinking. These aren't things that can be learned or copied. They're unconscious behaviors." A loud knock at the front door echoed through the mansion, making them all jump. Mrs. Peterson hurried downstairs to answer it, returning moments later with a troubled expression. "Mr. Richmond, there's a man here from Child Protective Services. He says they received an anonymous tip about a missing child." Alexander felt his chest tighten. At this hour? The man who entered the room carried himself with an authority that seemed too practiced to be genuine. His badge identified him as James Cooper, but something about the way his eyes darted around the room set off warning bells in Alexander's mind. "We'll need to take the child into protective custody immediately," Cooper announced, pulling out official-looking papers. "Standard procedure in cases of abandoned minors." But before anyone could respond, the girl sat up in bed, her blind eyes somehow finding Cooper with unnerving accuracy. "You're not who you say you are," she said clearly. "The real James Cooper retired 3 years ago. I remember Elizabeth reading about it in the newspaper." The man's face hardened, his practiced smile disappearing. Without another word, he turned and left the room quickly, his footsteps echoing down the hallway with unusual urgency. "Doctor..." Matthews moved to the window just in time to see a black SUV pull away from the estate, its tires screeching on the wet pavement. "Alexander," he said gravely. "Whoever that man was, he wasn't from Child Protective Services. Someone knows the IE. Girl is here, and they want her badly enough to forge government credentials." Alexander moved to the bed, instinctively placing himself between the door and the child. "Why, who is she?" The girl reached out and took his hand, her small fingers intertwining with his. "The safe," she whispered. "You need to open it now. She left everything there, everything you need to know." Mrs. Peterson appeared in the doorway, holding a tablet. "Mr. Richmond, I've just checked with my contact at Social Services. There are no records of any missing children matching her description in the entire state. According to every database, this child doesn't exist. Thunder rolled outside, and rain began to pound against the windows with renewed force. The girl squeezed Alexander's hand tighter. "They're coming," she whispered. "The ones who tried to make me forget. But Elizabeth wouldn't let me forget. She kept me safe in here." She touched her temple gently, and for a moment her blank eyes seemed to flash with an inner light. Dr. Matthews exchanged a meaningful look with Alexander. "Whatever's going on here goes far beyond medical science. That man will be back, and next time he won't come alone. You need to figure out what's in that safe, Alexander, and you need to do it quickly." Alexander stood before Elizabeth's portrait in his study, his heart pounding. The painting captured her exactly as he remembered. Elegant, mysterious, with that hint of sadness in her eyes that he could never quite understand. The safe behind it had remained unopened for 15 years, its contents untouched since her passing. The girl's words echoed in his mind as he carefully removed the painting. Their wedding date. With trembling fingers, he input the numbers. 6/15/1985. The safe clicked open. Inside, he found a leather-bound journal, several manila envelopes, and a smaller box made of carved wood. As he reached for the journal, a voice from the doorway startled him. "I thought I might find you here, Father." Alexander turned to see Marcus standing there, his son's face hard with years of bitterness. At 32, Marcus was the spitting image of his younger self, but where Alexander's eyes had once held ambition, his son's burned with resentment. "Marcus," Alexander said carefully, "I didn't expect you until next week." "Clearly," Marcus replied, stepping into the study. His expensive suit and perfectly styled hair couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders. "I heard some interesting rumors at the club. Something about a mysterious child being brought to the estate." His eyes fell on the open safe. "Spring cleaning?" Before Alexander could respond, Mrs. Peterson appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Richmond, the girl is asking for you. She seems agitated." Marcus's eyebrows rose. "So it's true. Taking in strays now, Father? Or is this another one of your secrets?" "Marcus, this isn't the time." "It never is it?" Marcus cut him off. 15 years of being your dirty little secret, hidden away from society, and now suddenly you're playing the benevolent savior to some random child?" The tension in the room was broken by a small figure appearing behind Mrs. Peterson. The girl moved with surprising grace, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. "You sound just like her," the girl said softly. "Your mother had the same fire in her voice when she was angry." Marcus stumbled backward as if struck. "What did you say?" "Isabella," the girl continued. "She used to sing to you in Italian. Ninna nanna, ninna o questo bimbo a cielo do." The color drained from Marcus's face. How do you know that lullaby?" "Because Elizabeth was there," the girl replied. "She watched Isabella sing it to you in the garden of Villa Romano, the summer before everything changed." Alexander gripped the edge of his desk for support. Villa Romano, the place where he had first met Isabella, Marcus's mother. A chapter of his life he had buried so deep, he thought no one could ever unearth it. "That's impossible," Marcus whispered. "My mother abandoned us when I was 2. She never sang to me. She didn't abandon you," the girl interrupted. Elizabeth knew the truth. "It's all in there." She pointed unerringly toward the safe despite her blindness. "In the blue envelope with the Roman postmark." Alexander's hands shook as he reached back into the safe, finding the envelope exactly where the girl had indicated. The postmark was indeed from Rome, dated just weeks before Elizabeth's passing. Marcus watched, his anger momentarily forgotten as his father opened the envelope. Photographs spilled out, old Polaroids yellowed with age. In them, a beautiful young woman with Marcus's dark eyes held a baby, singing in a sun-drenched garden. "Isabella," Alexander breathed, memories flooding back. "But these were taken after I told her to leave." "Elizabeth kept track of her," the girl said quietly. "She knew Isabella didn't abandon Marcus. She was forced away, threatened by the same people who tried to make me forget. Elizabeth documented everything." Marcus snatched one of the photos, his composed facade cracking. All these years, you told me she left us. You told me she didn't. Want me? I thought I was protecting you, Alexander whispered, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. The girl moved forward, reaching out until her small hand found Marcus's. Your mother loved you so much. It hurt Elizabeth to watch, but she understood why your father did what he did. The same people who threatened Isabella are the ones who want me now. A sudden gust of wind rattled the study windows, making the crystal chandelier tinkle ominously. In the distance, car headlights appeared at the estate's gates. They're here, the girl said calmly. 3 cars, black SUVs like before, but this time they brought him. Brought who? Alexander demanded, moving protectively toward the child. The man who thinks he owns all the secrets. The one Elizabeth was going to expose before they stopped her. The one who's been watching your son, using his pain to turn him against you. The girl's blank eyes seemed to look through them all. The man who calls himself Thomas Wellington. Marcus's sharp intake of breath drew Alexander's attention. You know that name? He's been mentoring me, Marcus admitted, his voice unsteady. Offering to help me take control of the company. He said he knew things about you, about my mother. The girl's grip on Marcus's hand tightened. He knows things because he orchestrated them. Elizabeth discovered his plan, but before she could reveal it, she trailed off, her free hand touching the medallion at her neck. The sound of car doors slamming echoed from the front drive. Mrs. Peterson peered out the window, her face pale. They're approaching the house. Mr. Richmond, what should we do? Alexander looked at the journal in his hands, then at his son, and finally at the mysterious child who had turned his world upside down in a single night. In her blank eyes, he saw reflected the same determination he had once seen in Elizabeth's. We protect her, he said firmly. And we find out what Elizabeth knew, all of it. For the first time since entering the study, Marcus's face softened. He looked down at the photograph in his hands, then at the girl who knew impossible things. Slowly he nodded. Together, he said, and it sounded like the beginning of a promise. Mrs. Peterson's efficient mind worked quickly as she led them through the mansion's lesser-known corridors. After 40 years of service, she knew every hidden passage and secret door in the estate. The sound of knocking echoed through the main hall, but they were already moving toward the library's concealed entrance. The old service tunnel, she whispered, pushing aside a false panel in the bookcase. It hasn't been used since the renovation in '92, but it still connects to the garage complex. The girl walked confidently despite her blindness, one hand in Alexander's, the other still holding Marcus's. Elizabeth used to hide here during thunderstorms, she said softly. The sound echoes differently in the tunnel walls. It reminded her of the cave where her father used to take her as a child. Alexander stopped abruptly. I never knew that about Elizabeth. She never told me about any cave. Because it hurt too much, the girl replied. That's where she last saw her sister, the day before the accident. Elizabeth didn't have a sister, Alexander said automatically, but even as the words left his mouth, doubt crept in. How much did he really know about his wife's past? The knocking at the front door became more insistent. Through the mansion's security feed on his phone, Marcus watched as men in expensive suits spread out around the property. Wellington's here, he said grimly, and he brought his entire legal team. They're carrying documents. The girl's grip tightened. Not just documents, check the back of their jackets. Marcus zoomed in on the feed and cursed softly. They're armed. The tunnel air was thick with dust and memories as they made their way forward. Dr. Matthews, who had insisted on staying, kept close to the girl, monitoring her condition. The medallion at her neck seemed to glow faintly in the dim emergency lights. We need to understand what we're dealing with, Alexander said, clutching Elizabeth's journal. What exactly did she discover about Wellington? He builds empires on buried secrets, the girl answered. Elizabeth found out he's been collecting them for decades. Powerful families, hidden scandals, lost heirs. He uses the information to control people, to manipulate dynasties. Marcus's phone buzzed, a text message from Wellington himself. Your father has something that belongs to us. Help us retrieve it, and I'll ensure you get everything you deserve. He's trying to turn you against me again, Alexander said quietly. I know, Marcus replied, his voice hard. But I'm starting to see the game he's been playing. All those mentoring sessions, the hints about my mother. He was grooming me to be his weapon against you. They reached a junction in the tunnel. The girl pointed left without hesitation. The garage is that way, but we can't leave yet. There's something else we need from the house. What could be worth going back for? Dr. Matthews asked. The other journal, she said. The one Elizabeth hid inside the piano. The one that proves Wellington didn't just manipulate families, he destroyed them, including mine. A crash echoed from above. They were breaking into the mansion. Alexander's security system would slow them down, but not for long. Your family? Alexander's voice shook. What do you mean? The girl turned her blind eyes toward him. Elizabeth had a sister named Catherine. She disappeared 30 years ago, leaving behind a baby daughter. Wellington arranged everything, made it look like an accident. But Elizabeth knew. She kept searching, kept gathering evidence. The journal in the piano proves it all. Marcus checked his phone again. They're searching room by room if there really is another journal. There is, the girl insisted. And without it, we can't prove what Wellington did to any of the families. We can't prove what he did to Isabella or to my mother or to... She stopped suddenly, her face going pale. Above them, footsteps thundered through the mansion. They're in the music room, she whispered. They know about the piano. Alexander looked at his son, then at the mysterious child who seemed to carry so many answers. Years of being a businessman had taught him to calculate risks, to weigh options carefully. But Elizabeth's voice seemed to whisper in his mind. Sometimes, the biggest risk is not taking one at all. Marcus, he said, take Dr. Matthews and Mrs. Peterson through the tunnel. Get the cars ready. I'm going back for that journal. Not alone, Marcus said firmly. I've spent too many years believing Wellington's lies. It's time I helped expose the truth. The girl released their hands and stood straighter. I'm going too. I can find the journal. I can feel it, just like I can feel Elizabeth's presence. In this place. Dr. Matthews stepped forward. It's not safe. Your condition is exactly why they want me, she finished. Because I can see things they've tried to hide. Because I remember things they tried to erase. Elizabeth protected me all these years, kept me safe inside her memories. Now it's time I helped protect her truth. A new sound echoed through the tunnel. Helicopter blades. Wellington was bringing in reinforcements. We don't have much time, Alexander said. Whatever we're going to do, we have to do it now. The girl reached up and touched the medallion at her neck. Elizabeth always said that the truth has a way of rising to the surface, like a letter in a bottle, carried by waves until it reaches the right shore. Thunder crashed outside, and somewhere above them, Wellington's men began to tear the mansion apart. But in that moment, in the dim light of the secret tunnel, Alexander saw something in Marcus's expression change, the last walls of distrust crumbling away. Together, Marcus said again, but this time it wasn't just a promise, it was a revolution. The journey back through the tunnel felt like crossing a threshold between two worlds, the safe, predictable life Alexander had built for himself, and this new reality where every certainty was dissolving like mist. Mrs. Peterson and Dr. Matthews reluctantly continued toward the garage, while Alexander, Marcus, and the girl retraced their steps. They emerged through a hidden panel in the mansion's wine cellar. Above them, footsteps and voices echoed through the floorboards. The girl tilted her head, listening. 8 men in the music room, she whispered. They haven't found the compartment yet. Wellington is in your study, Alexander, reading Elizabeth's letters. Marcus checked his phone's security feed. How did you know that? The cameras don't even show... I see through Elizabeth's memories, she said simply, like watching a movie that never ends. She spent hours in that study, watching him write at that desk. She knew even then that something wasn't right. They crept up the cellar stairs, Alexander leading the way. Years of business negotiations had taught him to move quietly, to observe before being observed. But this was different. This was war. The girl tugged at his sleeve. Wait, she breathed. Someone's coming. They pressed themselves against the wall as footsteps approached. Through the crack in the door, they saw James Cooper, or whoever he really was, walking past, speaking quietly into a phone. "No sign of the journal yet, sir, but we found something else. Letters between Elizabeth Richmond and Catherine Walsh, dated after the supposed accident. If these are authentic..." The girl's hand tightened on Alexander's arm. "Catherine Walsh," she whispered. "Elizabeth's sister. My mother." The revelation hit Alexander like a physical blow. He looked at the child beside him, really looked at her, and suddenly saw what he should have seen from the beginning. The shape of her face, the set of her jaw, they were Elizabeth's features in miniature. "You're Catherine's daughter," he breathed. "Elizabeth's niece, our..." "Family," Marcus finished, his voice thick with emotion. "That's why Wellington wants you silenced. You're a living proof of his crimes." More footsteps above, more voices calling out as they searched. The girl turned her face toward the music room. "The piano was Elizabeth's wedding gift from her father," she said. "She chose it because it had a secret just like she did." A hollow space behind the pin block, where she kept her most dangerous truths. Alexander's mind raced. The restoration project. 3 years after we married, she insisted on having that specific piano restorer work on it. I always thought it was an odd choice. He charged 3 times the usual rate. "Because he did more than restore," the girl said. "He built the hidden compartment. Elizabeth knew someday someone would need to find what she left there." They moved through the house like shadows, using the girl's impossible knowledge of the searchers' locations to avoid detection. When they finally reached the music room, they found it empty, but ravaged. Books lay scattered across the floor, paintings hung crooked on the walls. The Steinway grand piano stood in the corner, its elegant form untouched so far. The girl walked directly to it, her fingers trailing along its polished surface. "They'll be back in exactly 40 seconds, she said calmly. "The journal is behind. The pin block. There's a lever under the right corner of the keyboard cover. Elizabeth designed it so only someone who knew exactly where to press would find it." Marcus stood guard at the door while Alexander followed the girl's directions. His fingers found a small irregularity in the wood, and when he pressed it, a soft click emanated from within the piano. The girl reached into the revealed space with unerring accuracy and withdrew a leather-bound book, similar to the one from the safe but older, its pages yellow with age. "Elizabeth's final testimony," she said, clutching it to her chest. "Everything Wellington tried to bury, the accidents that weren't accidents, the disappearances that weren't random, the children he stole, the families he broke." "Put the journal down," a smooth voice interrupted from the doorway, "and step away from the piano." Thomas Wellington stood there, impeccable in his tailored suit, flanked by 2 of his men. He looked exactly like his photos in the business magazines, distinguished, authoritative, and utterly ruthless. "Marcus," he said, his tone almost paternal, "I'm disappointed. I thought we had an understanding about your father's instability." But Marcus moved to stand between Wellington and his family, his decision made. "The only thing I understand now is how well you played me. Using my anger, my pain about my mother, you manipulated everything." Wellington's smile didn't waver. "Did this child fill your head with fantasies? Some ridiculous story about your mother being forced away? About Elizabeth Richmond's long-lost niece? Please, I expected better from you." "Elizabeth expected better from you," the girl said suddenly, her voice carrying an authority that seemed to fill the room. "That's why she started investigating after she discovered what you did to Catherine, to Isabella, to all of them." For the first time, Wellington's composure cracked. "How could you possibly know that?" the girl finished. "The same way I know about the boarding school in Switzerland where you hide them. The same way I know about the offshore accounts where you keep their silence bought and paid for. Elizabeth saw everything, and she made sure I would remember." A helicopter's spotlight suddenly illuminated the room through the windows, casting harsh shadows across Wellington's face. In that moment, he looked less like a distinguished businessman and more like a cornered predator. "Take them," he ordered his men. "All of them. The journal, too. It's time to end this little family reunion." But as his men stepped forward, a new sound cut through the storm outside. Police sirens, dozens of them approaching the estate. The girl smiled. "Right on time," she said softly. Elizabeth always said the truth finds its way home, like a compass pointing north, like a letter, in a bottle reaching the right shore. Wellington's face contorted with rage as he realized what was happening. But before he could speak, before he could act, Marcus's phone began to play a recording. His earlier conversation with Cooper about the letters, about Catherine Walsh, about all the secrets they thought were safely buried. "I took a page from your book," Marcus said, his voice steady. "Everything you've said since you arrived, every confession, every threat, it's all been broadcasting live to the police, just like you taught me. Always keep leverage." The sirens grew louder, and in that moment of confusion, the girl stepped forward, still holding the journal. "Elizabeth protected me all these years," she said, "kept me safe in her memories until I could find my way here. And now, Mr. Wellington, it's time for all your carefully buried truths to rise to the surface." Thunder crashed outside, and the storm that had been building all night finally broke over Richmond Estate, washing away the last shadows of secrecy and silence. The wail of police sirens filled the air as chaos erupted in the music room. Wellington's carefully maintained composure shattered completely, his aristocratic features twisting into something almost feral. He lunged for the journal, but Marcus was faster, pulling the girl and the precious book away from his reach. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," Wellington snarled, his cultured accent slipping. "Those memories she carries, they're not just Elizabeth's. They're fragments of every secret I've buried, every truth I've hidden. She's a living archive of everything I've spent decades concealing." The girl stood her ground, her blind eyes somehow finding Wellington's face. "Like how you arranged the accident that took my mother, or how you blackmailed Isabella with false evidence to make her leave her son. You were supposed to be eliminated," Wellington spat. "The chemical treatment should have erased everything. No child could survive that with their memories intact." Alexander felt ice in his veins. "You poisoned her? A child?" "I protected my empire," Wellington's voice rose. "Those who threatened it had to be managed. Elizabeth was getting too close, asking too many questions about her sister's disappearance. She had to be stopped." "But you didn't count on her finding me first," the girl said softly. "You didn't know she'd already discovered your school in Switzerland, where you hide the children you've stolen. She got to me before your men could take me there." Marcus's phone continued recording, capturing every damning word. Outside, the sound of helicopter blades mixed with police commands broadcast through megaphones. "Elizabeth knew what you'd done to Catherine," the girl continued, her voice growing stronger. "She tracked down every family you'd destroyed, documented every crime. But most importantly, she found a way to preserve the truth where you couldn't erase it." She touched her temple gently. "Inside memories, not just hers, but the memories of every person you've hurt. Somehow she found a way to pass them to me, to keep them safe until they could be revealed." Wellington's men looked uncertainly at their boss, their confidence wavering as police lights flashed through the windows. But Wellington himself was beyond caring about appearances now. "Do you know what it takes to build an empire?" he hissed. "The weak must be pruned away. The inconvenient truths must be buried. I didn't just build fortunes, I curated bloodlines, shaped dynasties. Every person I removed was a threat to the greater purpose." "And what purpose was that?" Alexander demanded, moving protectively closer to the girl. "Order," Wellington said, his eyes fever-bright. "Control. The right people in power. The right secrets kept hidden. I protected the foundations of society itself." The girl shook her head sadly. "No. You destroyed lives because you could. Because each secret you buried gave you power over another family, another fortune. Elizabeth saw what you really were, a collector of broken things. Suddenly the mansion's security system blared to life." Mrs. Peterson's voice came through the intercom. "Alexander, the police are in position. Dr. Matthews is with them, explaining everything." Wellington pulled a phone from his pocket, pressing buttons frantically. "It doesn't matter. One call and every record of my school disappears. Every account is emptied, every witness is silenced. I've spent decades preparing for this." But the girl smiled, a small knowing smile that was pure Elizabeth. Check your phone signal, Mr. Wellington. Elizabeth knew you'd try to run. That's why she had the estate equipped with signal jammers years ago. They just needed to be activated. Wellington's face went pale as his phone displayed no service. In the distance, police officers could be heard entering the mansion. "It's over," Marcus said, his voice firm. "The truth is coming out, all of it. The families you've torn apart will finally know what happened to their loved ones." The girl stepped forward, still clutching the journal. "Elizabeth left one more gift for you, Mr. Wellington. In this journal, there's a list. Every child you've hidden away, every parent you've blackmailed, every life you've tried to erase. And now," she paused as heavy footsteps approached the music room. "Now they're all coming home." Wellington's composure finally broke completely. He reached inside his jacket, but before he could withdraw whatever weapon he carried, Marcus tackled him to the ground. The impact sent them both crashing into the piano, keys jangling discordantly in the chaos. "Alexander!" the girl called out suddenly. "The medallion, take it! Elizabeth left one final message inside. The truth about everything, about who I really am." As police officers flooded into the room, Alexander's trembling fingers opened the silver locket. Inside was not a photograph, as he'd expected, but a tiny folded paper covered in Elizabeth's elegant handwriting. As he read the first line, his world tilted on its axis. "My dearest Alexander," it began, "if you're reading this, then our niece has finally found her way home. There's something you need to know about Catherine's daughter, about the gift she carries, and about the promise I made to protect her, a promise that reaches beyond death itself." As Wellington was led away in handcuffs, Alexander's hands shook while reading Elizabeth's letter. The girl stood beside him, her small hand finding his arm with uncanny precision, while Marcus secured the journal and coordinated with the police. "Read it aloud," the girl whispered. Elizabeth wanted everyone to hear this part. Alexander cleared his throat, his voice thick with emotion. "My dearest Alexander, the gift our niece carries is both a blessing and a burden. When Catherine discovered Wellington's true nature, she found a way to preserve memories, not just recollections, but the very essence of experiences within the neural pathways of her child. She was a brilliant neuroscientist, working on the frontiers of consciousness and memory. But her discovery was too powerful, too dangerous for Wellington to allow it to exist. The night Catherine disappeared, she transferred her most crucial memories into her daughter's mind. But she didn't stop there. Somehow, she found a way to leave space for more memories to be added, a living repository of truth that Wellington couldn't erase no matter how hard he tried. When I discovered what happened to my sister, I knew I had to protect her daughter. I spent years tracking her, always one step ahead of Wellington's men. And when I finally found her, I understood what Catherine had created, a child who could carry not just memories, but the very souls of those who needed to be remembered. I knew my time was growing short. Wellington's threats were becoming more direct, so I did what Catherine had taught me. I added my own memories, my own truths, to the precious gift her daughter already carried. Every secret I uncovered, every family Wellington destroyed, every child he stole, I preserved it all within her mind. But more than that, my love, I preserved us. Every moment we shared, every dream we built, every love letter we wrote, it's all there, safe within her consciousness. She carries not just the evidence of Wellington's crimes, but the very essence of our love story. Alexander had to pause, his vision blurring with tears. The girl squeezed his arm gently, encouraging him to continue. The medallion she wears was the key, a physical anchor to help her navigate the sea of memories within her mind. I knew that when the time was right, when Wellington's guard was lowest, she would find her way to you. And you, my darling, would recognize in her the echo of all the love we shared. Marcus must know the truth as well. Wellington didn't just separate him from Isabella, he stole countless children from their parents, all in the name of his twisted vision of social order. The proof is in my journal, but the living testimony is in our niece's memories. There's one more thing you need to know, Alexander. The chemical Wellington used to try to blind her didn't just affect her physical sight. It was meant to erase her memory completely, to destroy Catherine's gift and all the truths it contained. But something extraordinary happened instead. When her physical vision was taken, her inner sight grew stronger. She doesn't just remember the past, she experiences it as if it were happening now. Every memory, every moment, every truth we needed to preserve is alive within her. She is our living testimony, our bridge between past and present, our proof that love endures beyond death itself. Protect her, Alexander. Help her bring Wellington's victims home. And know that through her, my love for you will never fade. Forever yours, Elizabeth. The room fell silent as Alexander finished reading. Outside, the storm had begun to quiet, as if nature itself was pausing to absorb these revelations. There's more, the girl said softly. In the journal, names, dates, locations, everything needed to reunite the families Wellington tore apart. Including my mother, Marcus finished, his voice rough with emotion. You can tell me about her. You have her memories too. The girl nodded, reaching for his hand. Isabella never stopped fighting to get back to you. Every letter she wrote, every attempt she made to contact you, it's all here. She touched her temple. Elizabeth made sure I'd remember, so you'd know the truth. Alexander looked at his son, seeing the years of pain and anger melting away, in the face of this extraordinary truth. Marcus, I'm so sorry. I thought I was protecting you, but I was just another puppet in Wellington's game. We all were, Marcus replied, but his voice held forgiveness rather than accusation. But now, we can make it right, all of it. Dr. Matthews appeared in the doorway accompanied by several police officers. The authorities have secured Wellington's estate and his school in Switzerland. They're already finding records, children who've been hidden away for years. It's exactly as Elizabeth documented. The girl tilted her head, listening to something only she could hear. They'll need help, she said. The children, they're scared, confused. Many of them have forgotten their real names, their real families. Like you did, Alexander asked gently. She shook her head. I never forgot. Elizabeth wouldn't let me. She kept me whole, kept me connected to who I really was, even when Wellington's chemicals tried to erase everything. Marcus knelt beside her. And who are you? What's your real name? The girl smiled, that same smile that had haunted Alexander since he first saw her on the mountain. Road, Catherine named me Hope, she said softly, because even in the darkest times she believed the truth would eventually come to light. And Elizabeth protected that hope, preserved it within me, until we could all find our way home. As if in response to her words, the first rays of dawn began to pierce through the storm clouds, casting a gentle glow through the music room's windows. The light caught the silver medallion at Hope's neck, making it shine like a beacon of truth in the growing day. The following days at Richmond Estate transformed the mansion into a center of healing and reconnection. As Wellington's empire crumbled, families from across the globe began arriving, drawn by the impossible hope that their lost children might finally be found. Hope, the name itself now feeling like a prophecy, became their guide through the maze of forgotten memories. In the Grand Library, now converted into a makeshift reunion center, Alexander watched as his niece helped another family piece together their shattered past. A couple from Madrid had just arrived, their faces lined with decades of grief, clutching a photograph of a daughter taken from them 20 years ago. She loved gardenias, Hope said softly, holding the couple's hands. Every morning she would pick one from your garden and place it on the breakfast table. The day they took her, she had just planted new bulbs. She was wearing a yellow dress with white butterflies. The woman gasped, tears streaming down her face. No one knew about the butterflies. We never told anyone. Your daughter remembers, Hope assured them. She's at the school in Switzerland. She goes by a different name now, but she still plants gardenias every spring. She never forgot you, not really. Marcus stood in the doorway, watching these reunions with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Tomorrow, Isabella would arrive. After 30 years of separation, he would finally see his mother again. Hope had spent hours sharing Isabella's memories with him, helping him understand the depth of her love and the pain of their forced separation. She's nervous too, Hope said. suddenly appearing beside him. Even without physical sight, she moved through the mansion with perfect confidence now. Isabella worries you won't forgive her for not fighting harder to reach you. How could I not forgive her? Marcus's voice was rough with emotion. After everything Wellington did to keep us apart. Sometimes the hardest person to forgive is yourself, Alexander said, joining them. He had aged years in the past few days, the weight of truth and responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. I keep thinking about all the signs I missed, all the times I could have questioned Wellington's influence. Hope reached for both their hands, creating a circle of connection. Elizabeth knew you would blame yourself. That's why she left this message in her memories. Tell Alexander that our greatest strength was never in being perfect, but in learning to heal our imperfections together. The sound of helicopter blades interrupted their moment. Dr. Matthews hurried into the library, his face alight with excitement. The first group of children from the Swiss school has landed, 23 of them, just as Hope described. Through the window, they watched as a procession of young people walked from the helicopter pad toward the mansion. Some looked scared, others defiant, all carrying the weight of stolen years in their eyes. They're so young, Marcus whispered. Wellington preferred to take them young, Hope explained. He believed it made them easier to reshape, to mold into his vision of perfection. But he never understood that the heart keeps its own memories, deeper than any conditioning can reach. An elegant woman in her late 50s appeared in the library doorway, her silver hair styled immaculately, her posture rigid with years of enforced propriety. One of Wellington's former headmistresses coming forward with evidence after his arrest. "Miss Richmond," she said, addressing Hope with a mix of fear and reverence. "The children, they're asking for you. They say you're the only one who can help them remember who they really are." Hope squeezed Alexander and Marcus's hands before releasing them. Elizabeth knew this moment would come. That's why she spent years teaching me how to navigate the sea of memories she and my mother preserved. Each child's truth is like a different constellation. You just have to know how to read the stars. As Hope walked toward the arriving children, Alexander noticed something extraordinary. Though her eyes remained sightless, she seemed to glow with an inner light, as if all the love and memory she carried within her was somehow becoming visible. "I never believed in miracles," Marcus said quietly, watching as the first child reached for Hope's outstretched hand. "But this feels like witnessing the impossible." "Not impossible," Alexander corrected gently. "This is what love looks like when it refuses to be buried." Elizabeth understood that, so did Catherine. They knew that the truth preserved in memory and carried in hope would eventually light the way home. The setting sun cast long shadows through the library windows, but wherever Hope walked among the lost children, those shadows seemed to retreat. One by one, the young people gathered around her, drawn to the warmth of recognition in her voice. As she spoke their real names, names some of them hadn't heard in years. A small girl with fierce eyes who had spent 6 years answering to Margaret burst into tears when Hope knelt before her and whispered, "Lucia, your mother still sings your lullaby every night." A teenage boy, trained to believe he was an orphan, fell to his knees when Hope told him about the treehouse his father had built him, waiting all these years for his return. As night fell over Richmond Estate, the library glowed with the light of reunions. Parents who had never stopped searching found children who had never stopped yearning. Siblings separated by Wellington's machinations held each other for the first time in decades, and through it all, hope moved like a bridge between past and present, helping each lost soul find their way back to love. "Tomorrow," she said, returning. "To Alexander and Marcus, we'll help Isabella bridge the years between her last lullaby and your first forgiveness. But tonight," she turned her face toward the room full of healing hearts. "Tonight we remember that even the deepest wounds can heal when truth and love light the way." The medallion at her throat caught the last rays of sunset, sending prisms of light dancing across the library walls like silent fireworks, celebrating each homecoming. Dawn broke over Richmond Estate with a gentle persistence that matched the mood within its walls. In the blue guest room, Marcus stood before the mirror, adjusting his tie for the 7th time, his fingers trembling slightly. Hope sat in the window seat, her unseeing eyes somehow still tracking his nervous movements. "She bought you a tie like that once," Hope said softly. "In Rome, just before Wellington's men found her. Blue silk with tiny silver threads. She said it matched your eyes." Marcus froze. "I had a tie like that as a teenager. I never knew where it came from. Father, Alexander, said it was probably from the housekeeper. Isabella left it at your school's reception desk. She spent 3 days watching from across the street, hoping to catch a glimpse of you wearing it. On the 4th day, Wellington's men took her away again." A knock at the door interrupted them. Alexander entered, his face lined with emotion. "She's here." The journey to the mansion's front entrance felt like walking through a dream. Hope held Marcus's hand, grounding him with the weight of memory and truth. As they descended the grand staircase, she shared more fragments of Isabella's preserved memories. "You were 2 years old, dancing in the kitchen to an old Italian song on the radio. You kept saying, 'Ancora, mama, ancora.' 'More, mama, more.' She would lift you up and spin until you both got dizzy." Marcus's breath caught in his throat as they reached the foyer. Through the leaded glass panels flanking the front door, he could see a woman standing on the steps. Her dark hair was streaked with silver now, but her posture held the same grace he remembered from his earliest memories. "I can't," he whispered, rooted to the spot. "What if—" "She's just as scared," Hope said gently. "But love is stronger than fear. Elizabeth made sure I remembered that too." The massive door opened, and Isabella Romano stood before them, 30 years of separation crystallized in a single moment. Her hands flew to her mouth as she saw Marcus, tears already spilling down her cheeks. "Mio figlio," she breathed. "My son." Something broke inside Marcus, a wall he hadn't even known he'd built. He moved forward, or perhaps she did, and then they were holding each other. 3 decades of lost embraces compressed into a single moment. Mi dispiace tanto," Isabella sobbed. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "No, Mama," Marcus replied. In Italian he didn't know he remembered. "Non è colpa tua. It's not your fault." Hope stood beside Alexander, both of them witnesses to this miracle of reunion. "Elizabeth wanted you to see this," she told her uncle softly. "She knew that healing Marcus's heart would help heal yours too." Isabella finally pulled back enough to look at her son's face, her hands trembling as they traced his features. "I tried so many times to reach you. Letters, messages, even a birthday card every year. But they always found them first. Always stopped them." "I know, Mama. Hope showed me. She carries your memories, your love." Isabella turned to look at Hope, recognition dawning in her eyes. "Catherine's daughter. Elizabeth wrote to me about you, about what you could do. I didn't believe it was possible." "Nothing is impossible," Hope said, stepping forward. "Not when love is strong enough to bridge any distance. Would you like to show Marcus yourself? I can help you share your memories directly with him." Isabella nodded through her tears. Hope took both their hands, creating a circuit of connection. "Close your eyes," she instructed. "Let the memories flow." Suddenly, Marcus gasped. In his mind's eye, he saw himself as a baby, looking up at his mother's smiling face as she sang soft lullabies. He felt the love that radiated from her, pure and unconditional. The scene shifted. Isabella watching him play soccer from behind a fence at his school, her heart bursting with pride even as she had to remain hidden. Year after year of secret vigils, stolen glimpses, and a mother's love that never dimmed despite every obstacle Wellington placed in her path. When the connection ended, both Marcus and Isabella were crying openly. Alexander moved forward, his own eyes wet with tears. "Isabella," he said softly, "I was wrong. So terribly wrong to believe Wellington's lies, to keep you from our son." She shook her head. "You were deceived like so many others. The past cannot be changed, but hope has shown us that love leaves traces that can never truly be erased." Hope smiled, her blank eyes somehow radiating joy. "Elizabeth wanted you all to know that family isn't just about blood or memory. It's about the choices we make every day to love, to forgive, to rebuild what was broken." As if in response to her words, sunlight streamed through the foyer's stained glass windows, painting them all in colors of healing and hope. Outside, more cars were arriving, more families coming to reclaim their lost children, more hearts waiting to be mended. "There's so much time to make up for," Marcus said, still holding his mother's hand. "Time is a gift," Hope replied, touching the medallion at her throat. "And love is the light that shows us how to use it wisely." Isabella reached out and touched the medallion gently. "Elizabeth wore this the day she found me in Florence. She promised me then that someday, somehow, the truth would come to light, that love would find a way." "And it did," Alexander said, softly looking at his son and the mother of his child, at the niece who carried so many miracles within her. It found its way home. A week after Isabella's return, Richmond Estate had transformed into something Elizabeth might have dreamed of, a sanctuary of healing and restoration. The Grand Ballroom, once host to cold corporate gatherings, now served as a space for family reunions and therapeutic sessions. Dr. Matthews had assembled a team of trauma specialists who worked alongside Hope, using her unique gift to help the recovered children reconnect with their true identities. Alexander stood at the ballroom's entrance, watching as Hope worked with a young woman named Sarah, who had spent 15 years believing she was someone else. Their hands were clasped together, and tears streamed down Sarah's face as Hope shared her mother's memories. "You were wearing red shoes the day you learned to ride a bicycle," Hope was saying softly. "Your father ran alongside you, holding the seat until you found your balance. When you finally rode on your own, you laughed so hard you almost fell off. Your mother still has those shoes displayed in a glass case in your old room." Sarah's brother, who had never stopped searching for her, held her other hand. "It's true, Sarah. Mum touches that case every morning, like a prayer for your return." Marcus approached his father, Isabella at his side. The past week had been a journey of rediscovery for them all, piecing together 3 decades of lost moments. "The authorities have finished searching Wellington's last property in Geneva," he reported. "They found more documents, more evidence of his network, and more families to reunite," Isabella added, her accent still musical after all these years. "But there's something else, Alexander. Something about hope that Dr. Matthews discovered during her latest examination." Before she could continue, Hope herself called out from across the room, "Uncle Alexander, there's something you need to see." They made their way to where Hope sat with Sarah and her brother. The young woman was calmer now, grounded by the weight of recovered memories. Hope reached for Alexander's hand, her touch gentle but urgent. "Elizabeth left something else for you to understand," she said. "Something about the nature of her gift to me and why it's affecting me physically." Dr. Matthews joined them, his medical bag in hand. "I've been monitoring Hope's condition since we began these intensive memory-sharing sessions. The energy required to access and transfer these memories, it's taking a toll on her system." Alexander felt his heart constrict. "What do you mean?" Hope squeezed his hand. "The human mind wasn't designed to hold so many memories, so many lives. Elizabeth knew this when she added her memories to what my mother had already preserved. She knew there would be a price. But she also knew it would be temporary," Dr. Matthews interjected quickly, seeing the fear on Alexander's face. "The strain on Hope's system is like a muscle being stretched, painful now, but ultimately strengthening." "What happens to the memories?" Marcus asked, kneeling beside them. "Once they're shared, do they fade from Hope's mind?" Hope shook her head, smiling. "They transform. Each time I help someone reconnect with their past, it's like a knot being untangled. The memories don't disappear, but they settle, becoming more like echoes than shouts." Isabella moved forward, maternal instinct shining in her eyes. "Is there anything we can do to help?" "Actually, there is," Dr. Matthews said. "I've been consulting with neurologists worldwide. There's an experimental treatment that could help Hope's brain better integrate these memories, reduce the physical strain. And," he paused, looking at the child with wonder, "it might even restore her sight." The room fell silent. Hope's unseeing eyes widened slightly. Elizabeth knew about this possibility. She left a memory about it, but it was clouded, uncertain. She wasn't sure if medical science would advance enough in time. Alexander knelt before his niece. "The decision is yours, Hope. You've given so much of yourself to help others heal. If there's a chance to help you, But what about the remaining families? Hope asked. There are still so many memories to share, so many people to help find their way home. Sarah spoke up, her voice strong with newfound conviction. You've shown us that love leaves traces that can never be erased. Maybe it's time for us to help carry that message forward. Around the ballroom, other families who had been reunited through Hope's gift began to gather. A mother from Buenos Aires stepped forward, her recovered son by her side. We can tell our stories, she said. We can testify to the truth of what happened. The memories you've helped us reclaim, Sarah's brother added. They're part of us now. We can help the others understand, help them remember who they really are. Hope sat quietly for a moment, her fingers tracing the medallion at her neck. When she spoke, her voice carried echoes of Elizabeth's wisdom. Sometimes the greatest act of love is allowing others to help us heal. Dr. Matthews cleared his throat. The treatment would take time, and there's no guarantee it will fully restore your sight, but it could help your brain better process the massive amount of memories you carry. Elizabeth left one more message about this moment, Hope said softly. She wrote, "Tell Alexander that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is trust in the love that surrounds us and let it light our way forward." Alexander felt tears prick his eyes. Even now, Elizabeth's love continued to guide them. Marcus and Isabella moved closer, forming a protective circle around Hope. Around them, the families she had helped reunite watched with gentle understanding. "Whatever you decide," Alexander said, "we're here with you, all of us." Hope turned her face toward the window, where afternoon sunlight streamed into the ballroom. For a moment, she looked just like Elizabeth had when contemplating a particularly important decision. "Perhaps," she said finally, "this is what all these memories have been leading to, not just healing the past, but building a bridge to the future." The medallion caught the light, sending prisms dancing across their faces like tiny promises of hope yet to come. The decision to proceed with the treatment wasn't made lightly. For 3 days, Richmond Estate buzzed with consultations as specialists from around the world reviewed Hope's case. Dr. Matthews coordinated with a pioneering neuroscience team from Switzerland, ironically, the same country where Wellington had hidden so many stolen children. In Elizabeth's old greenhouse, now restored to its former glory, Hope sat among the blooming gardenias, while Alexander read her more of Elizabeth's journal entries. Each page revealed new layers of his wife's determination to protect both her niece and the precious memories she carried. She knew this day would come, Hope said, touching a gardenia petal gently. Not just the treatment, but this moment of choice. That's why she left so many breadcrumbs leading us here. Marcus entered the greenhouse, followed by Isabella and Mrs. Peterson. The housekeeper carried a tray with Hope's favorite chamomile tea, a preference she had inherited from Elizabeth's memories. "The medical team is ready," Marcus announced. "They've set up everything in the East Wing, but they say—" He hesitated, looking at his young cousin with concern. "They say the process of integrating the memories more fully might be intense. You'll experience everything again all at once, before your brain can properly sort and store it all." Hope sipped her tea calmly. "Like 1,000 movies playing simultaneously, until each finds its proper place on the shelf." "We'll be with you," Isabella promised, her maternal instincts extending naturally to her niece, every step of the way. Alexander watched as Hope set down her teacup with precise movements that mimicked Elizabeth's old grace. "There's something else you haven't told us, isn't there?" he asked gently. "Something Elizabeth left in your memories about this moment." Hope's unseeing eyes turned toward him with uncanny accuracy. "She knew the treatment might restore my sight, but she was afraid that seeing the present might somehow dim my ability to see the past so clearly. These memories, they're not just stories or images. They're like living things, growing and breathing inside me." "But you can't keep carrying such a burden," Mrs. Peterson said softly. "Even Elizabeth wouldn't want that for you." "No," Hope agreed. "She wanted me to choose life, to choose a future where I could be more than just a keeper of memories." She touched the medallion at her throat. "That's why she left this, not just as a key to the past, but as a bridge to the future." The greenhouse. Door opened again as Dr. Matthews entered with his team. Their equipment had been set up in what was once Elizabeth's private sitting room, a place Hope knew intimately through inherited memories, though she had never seen it with her own eyes. "We're ready when you are," the doctor said kindly. "The initial treatment will take several hours and then we'll see," Hope finished with a small smile. "In more ways than one." As they walked through the mansion's corridors, Hope trailing her fingers along the walls she knew by heart, other families gathered to offer their support. Sarah and her brother, the mother from Buenos Aires and her recovered son, dozens of others whose lives had been transformed by Hope's gift. They lined the hallways like an honor guard. In Elizabeth's sitting room, now converted into a state-of-the-art medical facility, Hope sat in what had once been her aunt's favorite reading chair. The medical team moved efficiently around her, attaching monitors and preparing specialized equipment. "Before we begin," Hope said, her voice clear in the hushed room, "I want to share one last memory. Elizabeth saved it specifically for this moment." She reached for Alexander's hand, and suddenly he was transported to a scene from 15 years ago. Elizabeth sat at her writing desk, penning what would be her final letter. But unlike the sadness he expected to feel, the memory was suffused with an overwhelming sense of hope and love. "My dearest Alexander," Elizabeth's voice echoed in his mind, "when you experience this moment, remember that every ending is also a beginning. The love we shared didn't end when I left this world. It transformed like light passing through a prism, touching others with its colors. Hope carries that light within her, but now it's time for her to shine with her own radiance." The memory faded gently, leaving Alexander with tears on his cheeks and a profound sense of peace in his heart. Around him, the medical team waited respectfully. "I'm ready," Hope announced, settling back in the chair. Her small hand found Isabella's, then Marcus's, creating a circle of connection. Elizabeth once wrote that love is like light. It can be reflected, refracted, transformed, but never destroyed. Whatever happens next, that truth remains. Dr. Matthews nodded to his team and the treatment began. As the specialized equipment hummed to life, Hope's grip on their hands tightened slightly. Outside the window, the afternoon sun broke through, the clouds bathing the room in warm light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the medical monitors. "Tell me a story," Hope whispered as the medication began to take effect. "Tell me about the future we're going to build together." And so, as the treatment worked to heal her mind and possibly restore her sight, her family surrounded her with words of love and promise, weaving a new tapestry of memories for her to carry forward into the light of tomorrow. The first hours of Hope's treatment filled Elizabeth's sitting room with a symphony of medical equipment and whispered prayers. Dr. Matthews monitored the screens intently while Hope lay still, her small form seeming to pulse with an inner light as the specialized medications worked their way through her system. "The memories," she whispered suddenly, her voice distant yet clear. "They're dancing." Alexander, who hadn't left her side, leaned closer. "What do you see, sweetheart?" "Everything at once. Elizabeth in the garden, my mother in her laboratory, Isabella singing to baby Marcus." Her words came in waves, like water lapping at the shores of consciousness. "They're not just memories anymore. They're becoming something else." Dr. Matthews adjusted something on one of the monitors. "Her neural patterns are extraordinary. It's as if her brain is reorganizing itself, creating new pathways to handle the vast amount of information she carries." Marcus and Isabella had taken shifts sitting with Hope, but now they all gathered close as she began to speak more frequently, her voice carrying echoes of different times and lives. "The day Elizabeth discovered Wellington's true nature," Hope said, her unseeing eyes moving rapidly beneath closed lids. "She was in his office looking for proof about my mother's disappearance. There was a hidden compartment behind his desk, files going back decades, children's names crossed out and replaced." Isabella gasped softly as Hope continued. "And there, in a red folder, she found Marcus's name. Next to it, a detailed plan to separate him from his mother. That's when she knew she had to find a way to preserve the truth." Marcus gripped his mother's hand tightly as Hope's words painted pictures of the past. The medical team worked quietly around them, recording every detail as the child's brain processed years of stored memories. Something's changing, Hope announced suddenly, her voice taking on a new clarity. The memories, they're not just floating anymore. They're finding their places, like books settling onto shelves. But, she paused, her forehead creasing. Slightly, there's something else. Something Elizabeth hid so deep even she almost forgot. Dr. Matthews leaned forward, checking her vital signs. Her neural activity is spiking. Whatever she's accessing, it's something significant. The school in Switzerland, Hope continued, her voice growing stronger. So it wasn't Wellington's only operation. There was another place at a research facility. That's where my mother made her breakthrough about memory transfer, where she discovered how to preserve consciousness itself. Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. Catherine was working on consciousness transfer? Not transfer, preservation. She found a way to save memories in their purest form, to protect them from any attempt at erasure. Wellington wanted to use it to control people, to rewrite their pasts, but my mother, when she turned it into something else, a gift, a way to ensure that love and truth could never be completely erased. The medical monitors beeped more rapidly as Hope's hands tightened on the arms of her chair. Elizabeth found her research notes, spent years understanding them. That's how she knew what to do when she found me, how to add her own memories to what my mother had already preserved. The strain is increasing, Dr. Matthews warned. We might need to slow down the process. But Hope shook her head slightly. No, it's all right. The memories, they're not fighting anymore. They're harmonizing, like different instruments finding the same melody. Isabella moved closer, maternal instinct guiding her to stroke Hope's hair soothingly. Like the lullabies I used to sing to Marcus? Small smile touched Hope's lips. Yes, music memories are the strongest. They carry the most emotion. That's why Elizabeth made sure to preserve so many of them. Your lullabies, Isabella, the piano pieces she played for Alexander, the songs my mother hummed while working in her lab. Suddenly, Hope's whole body tensed. The medical equipment registered a surge of activity as she gasped, "Oh, I understand now why Elizabeth chose this particular treatment. It's not just about healing my brain or restoring my sight. It's about your completion." Completion, Alexander asked softly. The final piece of her plan. By helping my brain properly integrate all these memories, she's making sure they can never be lost again. Even if something happened to me, the memories would remain intact, protected. She found a way to make the truth permanent. Dr. Matthews studied the readings with amazement. The neural pathways being created, they're unlike anything I've ever seen. It's as if her brain is building a permanent archive, but one that's alive, growing, capable of forming new connections. Hope's face relaxed into a peaceful expression. That's exactly what it is. Elizabeth and my mother, they didn't just want to preserve the past. They wanted to create a bridge to the future. A way for love to keep growing, keep touching lives, even after they were gone. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds again, casting warm light across Hope's face. For a moment, she looked so much like Elizabeth that Alexander had to catch his breath. The memories will always be part of me, Hope said softly, but now they're settling into their proper places, like stars finding their constellations. And there's room now, that room for new memories, new love, new hope. Marcus looked at his father, then at his mother, seeing in their faces the same wonder he felt. Through this extraordinary child, their broken family hadn't just been reunited, it had been transformed into something greater than any of them could have imagined. As the medical equipment continued its gentle hum, Hope began to hum as well, a melody that wove together Isabella's lullabies, Elizabeth's piano songs, and Catherine's laboratory tunes into something entirely new. A song of healing, of memory, of love that refused to be forgotten. As evening approached, the atmosphere in Elizabeth's sitting room shifted. The medical equipment's rhythmic beeping had settled into a steady pattern, and Hope's breathing became deeper, more relaxed. Doctor. Matthews studied the latest readings with growing optimism. The integration process is nearly complete, he announced. Her brain has successfully created new neural pathways to handle the memory load. And there's something else. He pointed to a specific pattern on one of the screens. The damage, To her optical centers is showing signs of healing. Alexander leaned forward. What does that mean exactly? It means, Hope answered before the doctor could, her voice clear and strong, that Elizabeth was right. The darkness is starting to lift. The medical team began preparing for the final phase of the treatment. Outside, word had spread among the families staying at Richmond Estate. They gathered in the hallway, their collective hope filling the air like a tangible force. I can feel them out there, Hope said softly. All the lives we've helped piece back together. Their memories are different now. Not just stored in my mind, but alive in their own hearts. Isabella, who had been holding Hope's hand throughout the process, felt a slight tremor pass through the child's fingers. Cara mia, are you in pain? No, Hope smiled. Just changing, like a butterfly in its chrysalis. Everything that Elizabeth and my mother preserved is finding its true form. Marcus, who had been keeping a detailed record of the process, looked up from his notebook. You're speaking differently, he observed. More like yourself and less like an echo of Elizabeth, Hope finished. Yes, the memories are still there, but they're not controlling my voice anymore. They're becoming what they were meant to be, stories to be shared, not chains to be carried. Dr. Matthews approached with what looked like a specially designed pair of medical goggles. We're ready for the final step. These photonic modulators will help regulate the light reaching your retinas as your vision potentially returns. Are you ready? Hope reached up to touch the medallion at her throat one last time before nodding. Elizabeth left a message for this moment too. She said, "Sometimes we have to close our eyes to the past before we can truly see the future." As the doctor carefully placed the goggles over Hope's eyes, Alexander felt a surge of emotions he couldn't quite name. In this child, he saw reflections of everyone he had loved and lost. Elizabeth's grace, Catherine's brilliance, and something entirely new that belonged to Hope alone. The process will be gradual, Dr. Matthews explained. We'll slowly increase the light levels over the next hour. If your optical nerves have indeed begun to heal, you should start perceiving variations in brightness, then shapes, and eventually colors, Hope whispered. I remember colors from Elizabeth's memories. The blue of Alexander's eyes, the red of Isabella's favorite dress, the yellow roses in the garden. She paused, then added softly, my mother's green sweater, the one she wore the last time I saw her. The medical team began the careful process of increasing the light levels. In the hallway, the gathered families held their collective breath. Sarah, who had become something of a spokesperson for the recovered children, led them in a quiet prayer of hope. There's something, Hope said suddenly. A kind of glow. Dr. Matthews adjusted some settings. Can you describe what you're seeing? It's like dawn breaking through fog. Not clear shapes yet, but definitely light and shadow. Her voice caught slightly. It's beautiful. Alexander squeezed her hand. Take your time, sweetheart. We're all here with you. Over the next 40 minutes, Hope described the gradual return of her vision in a way that merged medical precision with poetic grace, a combination of Catherine's scientific mind and Elizabeth's artistic soul. The shadows are becoming more defined now, she reported. I can see movement, someone's hand. She reached out and touched Isabella's fingers, which had been waving gently in front of her. Yes, Isabella's hand, I can see it and feel it at the same time. It's like the memories are connecting with real-time perception. Marcus moved closer. Can you see colors yet? Starting to blues and greens first, like Elizabeth predicted in her notes. She knew the healing would follow the natural spectrum of light. Dr. Matthews made another adjustment, and Hope gasped softly. Oh, everything's becoming clearer. I can see faces, still blurry, but... She turned, her head slowly. Alexander, you look just like Elizabeth's memories of you, but older, gentler somehow. And Marcus, you have Isabella's smile. Did you know that? Tears flowed freely now, not just from Hope's hidden eyes, but from everyone in the room. The medical team worked with quiet efficiency, making final adjustments as Hope's world of darkness gradually transformed into one of light and color. "There's one more setting," Dr. Matthews said finally. "Are you ready to try without the goggles?" Hope took a deep breath. Yes, Elizabeth said that courage isn't about being unafraid, it's about letting love be stronger than fear. With infinite care, the doctor removed the protective eyewear. Hope kept her eyes closed for a moment, feeling the warm evening sunlight on her face. Then slowly she opened them. The first thing she saw clearly was the medallion in her hands, Elizabeth's name catching the light just as it had on that misty mountain road. Then she looked up, her eyes, a striking shade of green. That matched Catherine's, focusing on each face in turn. "I can see you," she whispered. "I can really see you," and she smiled, touching the medallion again. "I can still see them too. All the memories, all the love, all the truth. But now it's not just inside me. It's everywhere I look." The sun setting outside the windows painted the room in shades of gold and rose, colors that Hope was seeing with her own eyes for the first time. But more beautiful than the sunset was the light of love and healing that seemed to radiate from every person present, a light that no darkness could ever truly extinguish. The days following Hope's treatment brought a cascade of discoveries that transformed Richmond Estate into a place of wonder. Each morning, she woke to explore her newly visible world, matching Elizabeth's preserved memories with the reality before her eyes. The experience was like watching two movies simultaneously, one from the past and one in the present, that somehow merged into a deeper understanding of both. "The gardens have changed," Hope observed one morning, standing with Alexander by the rose bushes. In Elizabeth's memories, the white roses dominated this corner, but now the red ones have taken over. Yet somehow, she touched a bloom gently. They're exactly where they need to be. Alexander watched his niece with amazement. The return of her sight hadn't diminished her extraordinary gift. Instead, it had transformed it into something even more remarkable. She could now see both the physical world and the memories she carried with perfect clarity, weaving them together into a tapestry of understanding that continued to help heal broken families. Inside the mansion's library, Marcus and Isabella had been working with a team of lawyers to document Wellington's crimes and help restore the stolen children's legal identities. Hope's testimony, combined with her ability to recall precise details from Elizabeth's investigations, was proving invaluable. "It's fascinating," Dr. Matthews remarked, reviewing his latest findings. "The treatment didn't just restore your vision, it seems to have enhanced your ability to access and share memories. It's as if seeing the physical world has given your gift a new dimension." Hope sat in Elizabeth's favorite window seat, watching a family reunion taking place in the garden below. A teenage boy, recently recovered from Wellington School, was meeting his younger siblings for the first time. Through the window glass, she could see both the present moment and echoes of Elizabeth watching similar scenes years ago. "She knew this would happen," Hope said softly. "Elizabeth, I mean. In her memories, I can see her studying my mother's research, understanding that the return of physical sight would create a bridge between stored memories and new experiences." Mrs. Peterson entered with a tea tray, setting it beside Hope. "You even pour tea the same way she did," the housekeeper observed with gentle amazement. "But now I do it because I choose to," Hope smiled. "Not because her memories guide my hands. It's like learning to dance by watching someone you love, then finding your own rhythm within the steps they taught you." The afternoon brought more families to Richmond Estate. News of Hope's gift had spread through carefully controlled channels, reaching others who had lost children to Wellington schemes. Each reunion was unique, but all were guided by Hope's extraordinary ability to bridge past and present. "Your daughter," she told a couple from Toronto, "used to build tiny houses out of playing cards. She'd spend hours getting them just right, and even when they fell, she'd laugh and start again. That persistence, it helped her survive all these years. She never stopped building, never stopped believing she'd find her way back to you." The woman gasped, clutching her husband's hand. "We never told anyone about the card houses. How could you possibly?" "Because Elizabeth saw her," Hope explained, "at Wellington School. She documented everything, preserved every detail she could find about every child. And now," she turned to the window, where a young woman waited nervously in the garden. "Now your daughter is ready to come home." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the estate's grounds, Alexander found Hope in Elizabeth's sitting room. She stood before his wife's portrait, studying it with an expression that merged childhood innocence with ancient wisdom. "It's different," she said without turning, seeing her with my own eyes instead of just through memories. The artist captured her smile perfectly, but missed the tiny scar above her left eyebrow, the one she got falling from an apple tree when she was 12. Alexander moved to stand beside her. "There's so much I never knew about her." "She knew that too," Hope replied. "That's why she left so many memories. Not just of Wellington's crimes, but of all the small moments that made up her life. The morning dew on her favorite roses, the way sunlight hit your face when you were lost in thought, the sound of Marcus's first laugh." She turned to her uncle, her green eyes, so like Catherine's, bright with purpose. "But she didn't just want us to live in memories. That's why she made sure I would see again. She wanted us to build something new from the foundations of truth she helped preserve." Outside, the evening air filled with the sound of children laughing, recovered souls learning to play again, to trust again, to love again. Hope walked to the window, watching as Marcus organized a game of hide-and-seek in the garden. Isabella keeping score with the same musical laugh that had once filled baby Marcus's nursery. "You know," Hope said thoughtfully, "Elizabeth left one more gift in her memories, something she discovered in Wellington's private files before he silenced her. There are more children out there, in places even he forgot about. And now that I can see both the past and the present clearly." She touched the medallion at her throat, which seemed to glow in the evening light. "Now we can find them all." Alexander felt a familiar stirring in his heart, the same feeling he'd had that foggy night on the mountain road when a mysterious child had appeared out of nowhere to change everything. "Then that's what we'll do," he said simply. Hope smiled, and in her face Alexander saw reflections of all the love that had brought them to this moment. Elizabeth's wisdom, Catherine's courage, Isabella's devotion, and something uniquely Hope's own. A light that could illuminate even the darkest corners of the past while pointing the way toward a brighter future. "Together," she said, echoing the promise that had started their journey. But now it wasn't just a word of healing. It was a declaration of purpose, a commitment to continue the work Elizabeth had begun, to keep bringing lost children home until every stolen light was restored to its proper constellation of love. The discovery of Wellington's forgotten facilities sent ripples through Richmond Estate. Maps and documents recovered from his various properties revealed a network more extensive than anyone had imagined. But now, with Hope's unique ability to see both stored memories and physical reality, they had an unprecedented advantage in their search for the remaining lost children. In the estate's newly established command center, once the formal dining room, Marcus coordinated with international authorities while Hope helped identify locations through the memories Elizabeth had preserved. "There's a pattern," Hope explained, studying a holographic map display that one of Dr. Matthew's colleagues had set up. Wellington didn't just hide the children randomly. He placed them strategically like pieces on a chessboard. Each location connects to others through a series of shell companies and false identities. Isabella, who had proven remarkably skilled at untangling Wellington's financial webs, pointed to a cluster of dots in Northern Europe. These foundations all share board members with his Swiss operation. If we follow the money— "Wait," Hope interrupted, her eyes taking on that distant look that meant she was accessing Elizabeth's memories. "The board members aren't the key. Look at the administrative staff, the people Wellington thought were too insignificant to hide carefully. Elizabeth noticed something about them." She closed her eyes, not from blindness now, but from concentration. There was a pattern to their hiring dates. Every time Wellington acquired a new child, he would place someone, usually a distant relative of the child's family, in a minor position at one of his facilities. Insurance, he called it. A way to keep families hopeful enough not to look too closely, but not powerful enough to help. Alexander, who had been quietly observing, felt a chill of recognition. He did the same thing with Marcus, that junior executive who always seemed to know where Isabella was. "Was my cousin Antonio," Isabella finished, understanding dawning in her eyes. I never made the connection before, but he always seemed to appear whenever I got close to finding Marcus. Hope nodded, her fingers tracing patterns on the holographic display. Elizabeth documented dozens of similar cases. She called them Wellington's witnesses, people placed strategically to monitor the separated families while providing just enough hope to keep them from taking desperate action. Marcus pulled up personnel files from Wellington's operations. If we cross-reference employee records with the dates children disappeared, we can map his entire network, Hope finished. Not just the facilities we already know about, but the ones he buried so deep even he might have forgotten them. Dr. Matthews, who had been consulting with his team about Hope's continued progress, joined them at the map. Your ability to process both stored and new information simultaneously is remarkable, he told Hope. It's as if your brain has created a new way of seeing, one that combines memory, observation, and analysis in real time. Hope smiled, touching the medallion that still hung at her throat. Elizabeth knew this would happen. In her memories, I can see her studying my mother's research, understanding that the combination of restored sight and preserved memories would create something entirely new. She called it convergence sight, the ability to see past and present, simultaneously, finding patterns that neither perspective could reveal alone. A commotion at the estate's entrance drew their attention. Sarah, who had taken on a leadership role among the recovered children, rushed into the command center. The team in Prague just reported in, she announced breathlessly. They found another facility, hidden beneath an old library. There are records there, dozens of files about children we didn't know about. Hope turned toward the door before Sarah finished speaking, her eyes focusing on something beyond the present moment. The library with the blue door, she said softly. Elizabeth saw it in Wellington's private photos. She couldn't investigate it herself, but she memorized every detail she could find. She walked to a blank wall and, with perfect precision, began describing what she saw in her combined vision of past and present. The children there weren't supposed to be remembered at all. They were his special cases, the ones whose disappearances were never reported because the families themselves were under his control. But Elizabeth found a way to preserve their stories too. Alexander watched as his niece directed the team to document her descriptions, her words painting pictures of lives Wellington had tried to erase completely. In her face, he saw the same determination that had driven Elizabeth to spend years gathering evidence, the same compassion that had led Catherine to develop her revolutionary memory preservation technique. We'll need to move carefully, Marcus cautioned, already coordinating with authorities in Prague. These families might not even know they've lost something. Everyone knows when they've lost a piece of their heart, Isabella said softly. Even if they've been convinced to forget. Hope turned from the wall, her green eyes bright with purpose. That's why Elizabeth preserved everything she could. Not just the facts about Wellington's crimes, but the emotional truths as well. The love that remained even when memories were suppressed. The connections that survived even when families were torn apart. She moved to the holographic display again, her fingers dancing through the light patterns as she combined Elizabeth's preserved knowledge with new information from Prague. Each discovery leads to more. It's like following strands of light through darkness, finding new stars to add to our constellation of truth. Alexander placed a gentle hand on his niece's shoulder. Elizabeth would be proud of how you're using her gift. It's not just her gift anymore, Hope replied, smiling up at him. It's become something new, something that belongs to all of us. Every child we bring home, every family we help reunite, adds their own light to the pattern. Outside the command center windows, the sun broke through gathering clouds, sending rays of light dancing through the holographic display. For a moment, the patterns Hope had been tracking seemed to come alive, glowing with the combined radiance of past and present, memory and hope, loss and restoration. Elizabeth used to say that truth is like light, Hope said softly, watching the interplay of sunbeams and data streams. It can be hidden but never destroyed. It finds its way through every crack, every opening, until eventually... She smiled as another message arrived from Prague, bringing news of more discoveries, more possibilities for healing. Until eventually, she finished. It illuminates everything. The Prague discovery led to an avalanche of revelations. Within days, Richmond Estate's command center was coordinating operations across 3 continents. Hope's unique ability to combine Elizabeth's preserved memories with real-time observations proved invaluable as they uncovered more of Wellington's hidden network. "There's something different about these new facilities," Hope said one morning, studying fresh data from Eastern Europe. She stood before the holographic display, her eyes moving between present and past with practiced ease. The children here weren't just hidden, they were being trained for something. Marcus looked up from his laptop, where he'd been analyzing financial records. "Trained for what?" "Elizabeth found fragments of Wellington's long-term plan," Hope explained, her fingers tracing patterns in the holographic light. He wasn't just separating families, he was creating what he called his legacy generation, children carefully selected and conditioned to eventually take over key positions in global industries. Alexander felt a familiar chill. He was building his own dynasty. More than that, Isabella added, understanding dawning in her eyes. He was positioning these children to control entire sectors of society, banking, technology, media. "That's why these facilities were hidden so deeply," Hope continued. "The children here weren't just meant to be forgotten. They were being groomed to become Wellington's unknowing agents in the world's most powerful institutions." Dr. Matthews, who had stayed on to monitor Hope's progress, shook his head in amazement. "The way you're processing all this information, combining Elizabeth's memories with new data in real time, it's revolutionary. Your brain has created entirely new neural pathways to handle this kind of simultaneous past-present analysis." Hope touched the medallion at her throat, a gesture that had become both comfort and connection to Elizabeth's preserved wisdom. "It's like having 2 sets of eyes now. One sees the present moment, while the other sees through the layers of time Elizabeth preserved. Together, they reveal patterns that neither perspective could show alone." Sarah burst into the command center, her face flushed with excitement. The team in Prague found something in the library basement, a hidden room full of personal items, things taken from the children when they arrived. Hope turned toward her friend, but her gaze seemed to look through multiple layers of reality. Elizabeth saw something about this in Wellington's private files. He kept memory tokens from each child, objects that connected them to their real identities. He believed that by controlling these connections to their past, he could better shape their future. Marcus was already coordinating with the Prague team. "They're cataloging everything now, but Hope, we'll need your help identifying—" "I can do more than identify them," Hope interrupted softly. "I can show you what they mean." She walked to the center of the room, where the holographic display created a sphere of floating data points around her. Elizabeth didn't just preserve images of these objects, she preserved the stories behind them, the memories that make them precious. As if to demonstrate, she pointed to a specific data point representing a recovered item. "That silver bracelet with the dancing bear charm? It belongs to a girl Wellington renamed Catherine Spencer, but her real name is Sophia Novak, and the bracelet was a gift from her grandmother the day before she disappeared. Her grandmother spent years making those charms by hand, one for each of Sophia's birthdays." The room fell silent as Hope continued, weaving together present facts and preserved memories into stories of love, loss, and hope for reunion. Each object became a constellation of meaning, a map leading back to families who had never stopped searching. Alexander watched his niece work, marveling at how she had grown into her extraordinary gift. She was no longer just a vessel for Elizabeth's memories. She had become a bridge between past and present, helping to heal wounds that had festered for decades. "There's something else," Hope said suddenly, her voice taking on a new urgency. "These training facilities, they're still active. Wellington's arrest didn't shut them down completely. There are others, people he trained, people who believed in his vision, who are trying to continue his work." Isabella moved to the holographic display, her investigative instincts sharp. "The financial patterns show it. Some of these operations are still receiving funding through incredibly complex channels. That's why we need to move quickly," Hope explained. Elizabeth found evidence that Wellington had contingency plans, protocols his followers would implement if he ever lost. Control. They're trying to move these children before we can reach them. Marcus was already mobilizing their international network of allies. How many facilities are we talking about? Hope closed her eyes, combining Elizabeth's preserved knowledge with the new data streaming in from Prague. 7 major centers spread across Europe and Asia. But they're not all what they seem. Some are decoys, meant to distract from the real locations. Elizabeth discovered this pattern in Wellington's private documents. He always built his true operations in places people would overlook. Like the library in Prague, Sarah added, understanding dawning on her face. Exactly, Hope nodded. Places that seem so ordinary, no one would think to look closer. But Elizabeth did look closer. She documented everything she found, and now Hope opened her eyes, which seemed to shine with both present purpose and preserved wisdom. Now we can use her observations to see what others missed. The holographic display shifted as Hope interfaced with it, her unique vision allowing her to layer Elizabeth's memories over current satellite data. Patterns emerged, subtle connections between seemingly unrelated locations, threads of truth weaving through Wellington's web of deception. Here, she said finally, pointing to a series of points that pulsed with new significance. These are the real facilities, and in each one there are children who still don't know who they really are, children who need us to help them remember. Alexander stepped forward, seeing in his niece's face the same determination that had driven Elizabeth to spend years gathering evidence. Then we'll help them remember, all of them. Hope smiled, a smile that combined Elizabeth's wisdom, Catherine's courage, and her own unique light. Yes, she said softly, because everyone deserves to know their true constellation of belonging. Outside the command center windows, the sun broke through gathering clouds, sending rays of light dancing through the holographic display. In that moment, every point of data seemed to shine like a star, creating a map of hope that led not just to hidden places, but to hearts waiting to be restored. The next phase of their mission began with a sunrise conference call connecting Richmond Estate to law enforcement agencies across 3 continents. Hope sat at the center of the command center, her dual vision, both physical and memorial, helping coordinate the complex operation they were about to undertake. Wellington's followers will be expecting us to target the obvious facilities first, she explained, addressing the assembled team both in person and virtually. But Elizabeth found a better way. In her memories, I can see the pattern she discovered, a way to approach multiple locations simultaneously, using their own security protocols against them. Marcus, who had been up all night coordinating with international teams, pulled up a detailed timeline on the main screen. We have a 12-hour window before they realize what's happening. After that, they'll start their contingency. Protocols, Hope finished. But that's exactly what we want them to do. She smiled, a glimmer of Elizabeth's strategic brilliance shining through her eyes. Because when they activate their emergency procedures, they'll follow Wellington's preset patterns. Patterns Elizabeth documented in detail. Dr. Matthews, who had been monitoring Hope's extraordinary neural activity during their planning sessions, leaned forward with interest. You're not just remembering Elizabeth's observations. You're actively combining them with real-time tactical analysis. Your brain is literally processing past and present simultaneously. It's like watching 2 movies at once, Hope explained. But instead of being confused, I can see how they complement each other. Elizabeth's memories show me what Wellington's people will do, while my present sight shows me how we can use that knowledge. Isabella, who had been quiet for most of the morning, suddenly spoke up. The financial trails are shifting. They're already moving assets, preparing for something. Hope turned toward the holographic display, her eyes tracking invisible patterns in the data. Yes, they're following Wellington's contingency plan exactly as Elizabeth predicted. Look at the movement of funds. It's the same sequence she documented in his private files. Alexander watched as his niece directed different teams to their positions, her unique perspective guiding each group with precise instructions. She was no longer just a child carrying preserved memories. She had become a bridge between past and present, using her gift to orchestrate a symphony of justice and restoration. The first team is in position in Budapest, Marcus reported, reading from his secure tablet. Second team approaching the facility in Munich. Third team, wait, something's happening in Prague. Hope's expression shifted as she accessed Elizabeth's preserved memories. The underground library. There's another level below the one we found. Elizabeth saw references to it in Wellington's personal notes, but she couldn't confirm its existence before. She paused, diplomatic as always when referring to Elizabeth's departure. "What's down there?" Sarah asked, her own experiences with Wellington's facilities making her voice tense. "Not what," Hope corrected gently. "Who?" This was Wellington's special project. Children he selected for their unique abilities. Like me, but different. He was trying to recreate what my mother discovered about memory preservation. But he never understood that it wasn't about technology or training. It was about love. The command center fell silent as Hope continued, her voice carrying echoes of both Elizabeth's wisdom and her own growing understanding. These children, he tried to force them to develop abilities like mine. But you can't force something that comes from love. Elizabeth saw what he was doing and documented everything, knowing that someday we would need to help these children heal in a different way. As if in response to her words, new data began streaming in from the Prague team. They had found the hidden level, and what they discovered there broke everyone's hearts. Children who had been subjected to Wellington's attempts to replicate Catherine's groundbreaking work on memory preservation. "We need to adjust our approach," Hope said firmly. "These children will need special care. They've been trained to distrust their own memories, their own hearts." But Elizabeth left instructions for this too. She touched the medallion at her throat, drawing strength from its connection to the past. Each child there carries a fragment of truth they were forced to suppress. We don't need to make them remember. We need to show them that it's safe to remember on their own. Marcus was already coordinating with trauma specialists who had experience working with Wellington's victims. What about the other facilities? If we delay the main operation, we won't delay, Hope assured him. Elizabeth's memories show us how to do both. Wellington's followers are so focused on protecting their special project that they've left the other facilities vulnerable. We can help these children in Prague while simultaneously freeing those held elsewhere. The next few hours passed in a blur of coordinated action. Hope moved between different operations with fluid grace, her unique vision allowing her to guide teams through Wellington's labyrinth of deception. One by one, hidden facilities were located and secured, while specially trained counselors began the delicate process of helping the children in Prague reconnect with their true selves. As sunset approached, the first reports of success began flowing in. Families were being notified, preparations were being made for reunions, and Wellington's remaining network was crumbling under the weight of exposed truth. Elizabeth would be proud, Alexander said softly, watching his niece coordinate the final phases of the operation. Not just of what you've accomplished, but of how you've done it, with compassion, wisdom, and love. Hope turned to him, her green eyes bright with both present joy and preserved understanding. She knew this day would come. That's why she left so many breadcrumbs for us to follow, but she also knew that finding the children was just the first step. The real work, the work of healing and remembering, is only beginning. Through the command center windows, they could see new arrivals at Richmond Estate. Families coming to help support the rescued children, specialists arriving to assist with rehabilitation, and survivors of Wellington's earlier schemes returning to help others heal as they had been helped. Every star in its true constellation, Hope murmured, echoing Elizabeth's words from long ago. Every heart finding its way home. The evening light caught her medallion, sending prisms of color dancing across the room like promises of hope yet to come. In that moment, past and present seemed to merge perfectly in Hope's dual vision, illuminating not just the path they had traveled, but the journey of healing that still lay ahead. Richmond Estate had become a beacon of healing in the weeks following. The coordinated rescues. The grand halls that had once echoed with emptiness now resonated with the sounds of recovery, gentle conversations, occasional laughter, and the steady rhythm of hearts learning to trust again. Hope moved through it all like a bridge between worlds, her unique vision helping guide each soul toward restoration. One particular morning found her in the conservatory, working with a group of children rescued from the Prague facility. These young ones, who had been subjected to Wellington's twisted attempts to replicate Catherine's memory preservation technique, required an especially delicate approach to healing. "Each of you carries something precious," Hope explained, sitting among them in the morning light. "Not the artificial memories Wellington tried to impose, but your own true experiences, the ones your hearts kept safe even when your minds were confused." A small girl named Lily, who hadn't spoken since her rescue, looked up at Hope with questioning eyes. Hope smiled gently, recognizing in the child's gaze the same uncertainty she had once felt. "Would you like to see what I mean?" she asked softly. When Lily nodded, Hope took her hand. "Elizabeth preserved a special memory for moments like this. Close your eyes and let me show you." Through their connected hands, Hope shared a carefully chosen memory, not one of trauma or loss, but a simple moment of joy from Lily's early childhood. A summer morning in her family's garden, chasing butterflies while her mother sang an old lullaby. Lily's eyes flew open, tears streaming down her face. I remember that song," she whispered, speaking for the first time in weeks. "Mama used to sing it every night." "Yes," Hope confirmed. "That memory was always there, waiting safely in your heart. Wellington couldn't erase it, just like he couldn't erase any of your true memories. He only made you doubt them." In his private study, Alexander watched the session through the security feed, marveling at his niece's intuitive understanding of healing. Dr. Matthews sat beside him, monitoring Hope's neural activity through sophisticated equipment they'd installed throughout the estate. "It's remarkable," the doctor said, studying the readings. "When she shares memories like this, her brain activity shows patterns we've never seen before. It's as if she's creating temporary neural bridges between minds, helping others access their own suppressed memories through the strength of her gift." Marcus entered the study, carrying fresh reports from their international teams. "The last of Wellington's facilities has been secured, but we found something else, evidence that he was working on something bigger than we realized." Elizabeth knew. Hope's voice came from the doorway, where she now stood with Lily holding her hand. In her final days, she discovered references to what Wellington called his legacy protocol. It wasn't just about controlling the children he took, he was trying to create a way to transfer consciousness itself. Isabella, who had been quietly reviewing documents in the corner, looked up sharply. "Transfer consciousness? How is that possible?" "It isn't," Hope said simply. "At least, not the way he wanted. My mother discovered how to preserve memories through love, a natural connection that allows experiences to be shared and kept safe. Wellington tried to force it, to industrialize it. He thought if he could transfer his consciousness into specially prepared children, he could live forever, through them." Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. "That's monstrous." "Yes," Hope agreed. "But he failed, because he never understood what my mother and Elizabeth both knew. That true memory preservation isn't about control or power. It's about love, about the connections that keep our hearts whole, even when we're broken." Lily squeezed Hope's hand. And for a moment, everyone could see the change in the small girl's face, a spark of self-recognition returning to her eyes. Around the estate, similar transformations were taking place as other children began to reclaim their true memories, their real identities. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face alight with news. "The first group of families has arrived for the Prague children. They're waiting in the garden." Hope knelt beside Lily. "Your parents are among them," she said gently. "They never stopped looking for you, never stopped loving you. Would you like to see them?" The girl's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of joy. Will they recognize me?" "Love always recognizes itself," Hope answered, echoing words Elizabeth had once written. "No amount of time or distance can change that." As they walked toward the garden, Hope shared more of Elizabeth's preserved wisdom with the anxious child. "Your mother has kept your room exactly as you left it. The stuffed elephant you loved still sits on your bed, waiting for you. Your father still reads your favorite story every night, keeping your place marked in the book. They emerged into the sunlit garden, where dozens of families waited with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Lily's steps faltered for a moment, but then a woman's voice called out, a voice singing the same lullaby from the memory Hope had shared. What happened next was pure magic. Lily's whole being seemed to light up with recognition. She ran forward. As her parents rushed to meet her, their reunion becoming a beacon of hope for all the other families waiting to reconnect with their lost children. Hope stood back, watching through her dual vision as past and present merged in moments of pure love. Elizabeth's preserved memories showed her how similar scenes had played out years ago, while her present sight revealed how each reunion helped heal not just individual families, but the very fabric of trust that Wellington had tried to destroy. "This is what she fought for," Alexander said softly, coming to stand beside his niece. What they both fought for, Elizabeth and Catherine. The chance for love to triumph over fear, for truth to overcome deception. Hope touched the medallion at her throat, feeling the pulse of past and present flowing through her like light through a prism. And their fight lives on through every heart we help restore, every family we help reunite. Because love, real love, never truly ends. It just finds new ways to shine. As autumn painted Richmond Estate in hues of gold and crimson, the mansion continued its transformation from a place of solitary wealth into a sanctuary of healing and hope. The gardens, once Elizabeth's private refuge, now bloomed with new purpose as families gathered there to rebuild bonds that Wellington had tried to sever. Hope sat in her favorite spot beneath the old oak tree, watching as Marcus and Isabella helped a group of recently reunited families adjust to their new reality. Her unique vision allowed her to see both the present scene and echoes of similar moments Elizabeth had witnessed years ago, layers of healing separated by time, but connected by love. "The memories are settling differently now," she told Dr. Matthews during their daily checkup. "Not fading, but integrating, like streams flowing into a river that carries both past and present." The doctor nodded, reviewing her latest neural scans. "Your brain has created entirely new pathways to handle this dual processing. It's as if you've developed a new sense entirely, one that perceives time and memory as fluid, interconnected elements." Alexander joined them, carrying Elizabeth's journal. "I found something interesting," he said, opening to a marked page. Elizabeth wrote about this possibility. She believed that when memory preservation was guided by love, rather than forced by science, it could evolve into something more profound than simple recollection. Hope smiled, touching the medallion that still hung at her throat. She was right. What started as preserved memories has become a bridge, not just between past and present, but between hearts that need to remember how to trust again. As if to demonstrate, she turned her attention to a teenage boy who sat alone by the fountain, struggling to reconnect with his family after years in one of Wellington's facilities. Through her unique perspective, Hope could see both his present isolation and the bonds of love that still existed, waiting to be renewed. "James," she called softly, using his real name, the one Wellington had tried to make him forget. "Would you like to see something amazing?" The boy approached cautiously. Hope had learned that many of Wellington's victims responded better to gentle invitation than direct intervention. When James sat beside her, she took his hand carefully. "Your father used to take you sailing," she said, drawing on Elizabeth's preserved memories of the research she'd done into each family's history. "There was a small blue boat called Morning Star. You would wake up before dawn, just the two of you, and watch the sun rise over the water." James gasped softly as Hope shared not just the facts, but the feelings associated with those precious moments. The salty breeze, his father's laugh, the sense of perfect safety and joy. How do you know about Morning Star?" he whispered. "Because love keeps its own records," Hope replied. "Elizabeth found pictures of you and your father on that boat. She preserved them, along with every other piece of evidence that proved who you really are. Would you like to see your father now? He's brought something special to show you." James looked across the garden where his father waited anxiously, holding what appeared to be an old piece of wood. As Hope led James over, She could see through her dual vision that it was a piece of the original Morning Star's hull, kept all these years as a reminder of hope. These moments of reconnection happened daily now at Richmond Estate. Each one was unique, yet all followed the same essential truth that Elizabeth had discovered, that love leaves traces that can never be fully erased, only temporarily hidden. Isabella approached, carrying a stack of new files. More evidence has been uncovered at Wellington's estate in Geneva. His research notes, they're disturbing, but they help explain why he was so desperate to recreate Catherine's work. He was afraid, Hope said simply, her eyes seeing through layers of time and truth. Afraid of being forgotten, of losing control. He never understood that true legacy isn't about control at all. It's about the love we leave behind, the hearts we help heal, the light we share with others. Marcus joined them, having just finished a call with international authorities. The last of his followers have been apprehended. The network is completely disbanded. But more importantly, we found ways to restore the legal identities of every child he tried to erase. Alexander watched as families throughout the garden continued their journeys of healing, parents and children relearning each other's rhythms, siblings rediscovering shared jokes and memories, love gradually overwhelming the barriers that fear had built. Elizabeth would have loved seeing this, he said softly. Hope turned to him, her green eyes bright with both present joy and preserved wisdom. She does see it through me. Every reunion we help create, every heart we help restore, it's all part of the legacy she and my mother fought to preserve, not Wellington's legacy of control and fear, but one of love and healing. As the autumn sun began to set, casting long shadows across the estate's grounds, Hope gathered everyone in the garden for what had become a daily tradition. Children and parents, siblings and guardians, all joined hands in a circle of connection and hope. Every day, Hope began, her voice carrying Elizabeth's gentle strength, we prove that love is stronger than fear, that truth survives every attempt to bury it, that hearts can find their way home no matter how long they've been lost. She touched her medallion, which caught the evening light and seemed to glow with its own inner radiance. Elizabeth preserved these memories not just to expose Wellington's crimes, but to remind us all of a simple truth, that real power lies not in controlling others, but in helping them remember who they truly are. Around the circle, faces shone with tears and smiles as each person held tighter to the hands they clasped, hands that Wellington had once tried to force apart, but that love had brought back together. This is just the beginning, Hope concluded, her dual vision showing her both the beauty of the present moment and glimpses of the healing yet to come. Every story we help restore, every family we help reunite, becomes another bridge between past and present, another light guiding others home. As darkness fell, the garden blazed with hope, not just from the carefully placed lanterns, but from the renewed light in every rescued heart, every restored soul, every love that refused to be forgotten. Winter came early to Richmond Estate, dusting the grounds with a gentle blanket of snow that seemed to symbolize the fresh start so many had found there. In Elizabeth's former music room, now transformed into a cozy gathering space, Hope sat at the piano while families shared stories of their ongoing journeys of healing. Each note is like a memory, she explained to Lily, who had become something of an apprentice in the art of healing hearts. Some are bright, some are soft, but together they create something beautiful. Her fingers danced across the keys, playing a melody that Elizabeth had loved. Dr. Matthews, who had remained at the estate to document Hope's extraordinary development, watched in fascination as the music seemed to create visible changes in his monitoring equipment. The neural patterns when you play them, they're almost identical to when you're sharing memories. It's as if music and memory have become intertwined in your mind. They always were, Hope replied, continuing to play. Elizabeth understood that. It's why she spent so much time in this room, playing these same notes, weaving together the threads of truth she was gathering. The music helped her think, helped her see patterns others missed. Alexander entered the room carrying a leather portfolio they had discovered in Wellington's private vault. "The authorities have finished analyzing the last of his documents," he announced. "What they found, it explains so much about why he was so obsessed with memory and control." Hope's hands stilled on the piano keys. "He lost someone," she said softly, her dual vision revealing layers of truth in the documents. "Someone he couldn't control, couldn't force to stay. That's what started all of this." Marcus and Isabella joined them, having just returned from overseeing the transformation of one of Wellington's former facilities into a rehabilitation center. "What do you mean?" Isabella asked. "His sister," Hope explained, drawing on Elizabeth's preserved research. "She was brilliant like my mother. She discovered something about the nature of consciousness, something that scared Wellington. When he tried to control her research, to use it for his own purposes, she disappeared. He spent the rest of his life trying to recreate her work, to prove he could control even the most fundamental aspects of human identity. But he never could," Marcus added, understanding dawning in his eyes, "because he never understood what both Catherine and Elizabeth knew, that memory and identity are rooted in love, not control." Hope nodded, her fingers returning to the piano keys. "That's why his experiments always failed. He tried to force what can only be freely given, to control what can only be preserved through love." As she played, the music seemed to carry echoes of all the stories that had unfolded. At Richmond Estate, stories of loss and reunion, of fear overcome by love, of truth emerging from shadows. Through her unique vision, Hope could see how each note resonated with both past memories and present healing. "There's something else in those documents," she said, her hands still moving across the keys. "Something Elizabeth suspected but couldn't confirm. Wellington didn't just want to control memories, he wanted to create new ones to rewrite history itself. The children in Prague, the ones he subjected to his experiments, he was trying to turn them into living archives of his own designed reality." The music took on a more complex pattern, weaving together themes that seemed to represent the layers of truth they had uncovered. Dr. Matthews's equipment registered unprecedented levels of neural activity as Hope continued to play and speak. "But what he never understood," she continued, "was that real memories, true memories, are alive. They grow and change with us, they heal and transform, but they always remain rooted in love. That's what makes them impossible to fully erase or artificially create." Lily, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "Is that why we can remember now? Because the love was always there, just waiting?" Hope smiled, her fingers drawing forth a gentler melody. "Exactly. What Wellington tried to bury, what he tried to control and reshape, it was always there, like music waiting to be played. All you needed was someone to help you find the right keys, to show you that it's safe to remember, safe to feel, safe to love." Alexander watched as his niece's music drew more families into the room, each one carrying their own story of healing and restoration. Through Hope's gift, through Elizabeth's preserved wisdom, through Catherine's groundbreaking discovery, they had found a way to not just expose Wellington's crimes, but to heal the wounds he had created. The piano was Elizabeth's favorite place. "To think," Hope said, her playing growing softer. She said music was like memory. It exists even when no one is playing it, waiting to be brought back to life by loving hands. That's what we've been doing here, really. Not just helping people, remember, but helping them bring their love back to life." As snow continued to fall outside the music room windows, Hope's melody carried all the hope and healing that Richmond Estate had come to represent. Through her dual vision, she could see both the present moment and echoes of similar moments from the past, layers of love and memory creating a symphony of restoration. "Elizabeth left one more gift," she announced, her music taking on a triumphant tone. "In her final memories, she preserved not just what was, but what could be. She saw this moment, saw Richmond Estate becoming not just a place of healing for Wellington's victims, but a center for understanding memory itself, a place where love and science work together to help hearts remember their true songs." The music swelled, carrying with it all the promise of tomorrow, all the healing yet to come, all the love that refused to be forgotten. And in that moment, past and present seemed to merge perfectly in Hope's extraordinary vision, creating a bridge not just between memories, but between all the hearts that had found their way home. The transformation of Richmond Estate reached its culmination on a crystal-clear winter morning as Alexander stood before a gathering of families, officials, and media representatives. The mansion's grand ballroom, once a symbol of isolated wealth, now hummed with the energy of shared purpose and hope. "Today," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of all they had accomplished, "we officially establish the Richmond Walsh Foundation for Memory and Healing." He gestured to the portrait of Elizabeth that had been joined by a newly commissioned painting of Catherine Walsh, the two sisters united at last in their shared legacy of love and protection. Hope stood beside her uncle, her dual vision allowing her to see both the present ceremony and the echoes of Elizabeth's dreams for this moment. She wore the medallion proudly, but it was no longer just a connection to the past. It had become a symbol of the bridge they had built between memory and hope. "What began as one woman's quest for truth," Alexander continued, "has grown into something none of us could have imagined. Through Elizabeth's determination, Catherine's brilliance, and the extraordinary gift they helped preserve, we've not only exposed darkness, we've created light." Marcus and Isabella, standing with the other board members, smiled as Alexander outlined the Foundation's mission. They had worked tirelessly to transform Wellington's seized assets into resources for healing, turning the instruments of control into tools of restoration. "The Foundation will serve three primary purposes," Hope stepped forward to explain, her voice carrying both youth's clarity and wisdom's depth. "First, we will continue to help families affected by Wellington's actions, providing support for reunion and recovery. Second, we will advance ethical research into memory and consciousness, ensuring that knowledge serves love rather than control. And third," she smiled, touching the medallion, "we will preserve and share the stories of healing so that future generations will know that love always finds a way home." Dr. Matthews presented the preliminary results of his research into Hope's unique abilities, explaining how understanding her gift had opened new possibilities for helping trauma survivors reconnect with suppressed memories. "What we've learned here challenges everything we thought we knew about consciousness, memory, and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds." As the ceremony continued, Hope's attention was drawn to the back of the ballroom, where the most recently rescued children watched with their families. Through her extraordinary vision, she could see both their present healing and echoes of their past pain. But more importantly, she could see the bright threads of love that had never truly been broken. "Elizabeth and my mother understood something profound," Hope addressed the gathering, her voice clear and strong. "They knew that memories aren't just records of the past, they're seeds of the future. Every story we preserve, every heart we help heal, becomes part of a greater legacy of love that continues to grow and transform." Lily, who had blossomed into a confident young helper in their work, brought forward a crystal prism they had commissioned as a symbol of the Foundation's purpose. As Hope held it up, the winter sunlight streaming through the ballroom windows caught its facets, sending rainbows dancing across the gathered faces. "Like this light," Hope explained, "love can be reflected, refracted, and sometimes seemingly lost, but it can never be destroyed. Wellington tried to control it, to bend it to his will, but he never understood that real love, like light itself, follows its own natural laws." Alexander watched with pride as his niece continued, seeing in her the perfect synthesis of Elizabeth's compassion and Catherine's insight. The Foundation would be her legacy too, not just as a keeper of memories, but as a bridge builder between past and future. "Every person in this room carries a story," Hope said, her dual vision allowing her to see the layers of healing that had already taken place. Stories of loss and reunion, of fear overcome by love, of truth emerging from shadow. Through the Foundation, these stories will become beacons of hope for others still finding their way home. As she spoke, the prism's rainbow light seemed to gather and grow, illuminating the portraits of Elizabeth and Catherine like a promise fulfilled. Through Hope's unique perspective, past and present merged in a perfect moment of completion, not an ending, but a new beginning. "The work we've begun here," she concluded, her voice carrying echoes of both Elizabeth's determination and Catherine's vision, will continue to grow and transform, just like the memories we help preserve and heal. Because love, real love, is never static. It's alive, always reaching forward, always finding new ways to light the path home. The gathering erupted in applause, but Hope's attention was drawn to something only she could see, a shimmer of memory light that seemed to dance between the portraits of her mother and aunt. Through her extraordinary vision, she could see their legacy taking shape, not just in the Foundation's formal establishment, but in every healed heart, every restored family, every love that had refused to be forgotten. As winter sunlight continued to paint the ballroom in rainbow hues, Hope touched the medallion at her throat one last time, not in remembrance now, but in promise. The bridge between past and future was complete, and the real work of healing could truly begin. Spring arrived at Richmond Estate with a burst of new life that seemed to mirror the transformations taking place within its walls. The gardens Elizabeth had once tended alone now bloomed with shared purpose, as families gathered to plant memorial flowers, each one representing a child found, a heart healed, a love restored. Hope moved among the gardeners, her dual vision, allowing her to see both the present planting and Elizabeth's careful planning of these same beds years ago. But something had changed in how she experienced these overlapping realities. The memories were no longer just preserved moments. They had become living wisdom, growing and evolving with each new day. "The memories are different now," she explained to Dr. Matthews during their final documentation session. "Not fading, but transforming. Like seeds becoming flowers, they've grown into something new while keeping their essential truth." The doctor nodded, reviewing his years of research. "Your brain has essentially created a new form of consciousness, one that exists in both past and present simultaneously, yet remains perfectly balanced. It's extraordinary." Alexander joined them in the garden, carrying Elizabeth's journal. "I found her last entry," he said softly. "It's about you, Hope, about what she saw coming." Hope smiled, touching the medallion that had become not just a connection to the past, but a symbol of ongoing transformation. She knew this would happen. Not just the Foundation, but this moment, when preserved memories would become living wisdom. Marcus and Isabella approached, accompanied by a group of teenagers who had once been Wellington's prisoners, but were now helping other rescued children heal. Among them was James, who had found his voice as a peer counselor, using his own journey of recovery to help others find their way home. "We've received requests from healing centers around the world," Marcus reported. "They want to learn our methods, to understand how we've achieved such remarkable recovery rates." "It's not just methods," Hope replied, her voice carrying echoes of both Elizabeth's insight and her own growing wisdom. "It's understanding that healing isn't about erasing the past or controlling the future. It's about learning to hold both light and shadow, pain and love, memory and hope in perfect balance." She led them to a special section of the garden where something extraordinary was taking place. The flowers planted by reunited families had begun growing together in unexpected ways, creating patterns that seemed to mirror the neural pathways Dr. Matthews had documented in Hope's brain. "Look," she said, pointing to where different species of blooms had naturally intertwined. "This is what Elizabeth saw coming. Not just individual healing, but a new way of growing together. Each story, each memory, each love, contributing to something larger than itself." Isabella knelt to examine the intricate patterns. "Like the families we've helped, each unique, yet all connected in the journey of healing." "Exactly," Hope nodded. "Wellington tried to control every variable, to force connections that could only grow naturally. But look what happens when we let love lead the way." She gestured to where Lily was working with a group of younger children, teaching them to plant their own memorial flowers. The girl who had once been silent was now confidently sharing her story, helping others find their voices through the simple act of nurturing new life. "The Foundation isn't just about preserving memories or exposing truth," Hope continued. "It's about creating spaces where healing can grow naturally, where love can find its own way to bloom." Dr. Matthews made some final notes in his research journal. "What we've learned here will revolutionize our understanding of trauma recovery, memory processing, and the healing power of connection. But more importantly, Alexander added, it has shown us that no heart is ever truly lost, no love ever completely erased. Wellington's greatest failure wasn't in his inability to control memories. It was in his failure to understand that real power lies in letting go of control. As the spring day deepened into afternoon, hope gathered everyone in the center of the garden. The space had been transformed into a living memorial, with pathways connecting different areas of healing and restoration. At its heart stood a small fountain, its water flowing over crystals that caught and reflected light in ever-changing patterns. Elizabeth left one more gift for us to discover, Hope announced, her dual vision revealing layers of meaning in the garden's design. These paths, these connections between different areas of healing, they mirror the way love naturally flows between hearts. She knew that true healing couldn't be forced or controlled. It had to be grown, nurtured, allowed. To find its own way, she touched the medallion at her throat, and for a moment everyone could see what she saw, the garden as both a present reality and a living embodiment of Elizabeth's vision. The flowers planted by healed families created patterns like neural pathways, while the flowing water carried echoes of memories finding their way home. This is our real legacy, Hope said softly. Not just the healing we've achieved or the truths we've uncovered, but this understanding that love, like these gardens, will always find a way to grow, to connect, to transform darkness into light. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows, through the blooming gardens, Hope's dual vision showed her something extraordinary. The patterns of growth, the paths of healing, the connections between heart and memory, they had created something Elizabeth had foreseen but never lived to. See, a living map of love's endless capacity for renewal and restoration. We're not just healing the past, she realized aloud. We're growing the future, one restored heart at a time. On the eve of the first anniversary of the Richmond Walsh Foundation, Hope stood in Elizabeth's study, now transformed into a serene space where past and present seemed to flow together like gentle streams meeting in a peaceful river. The medallion at her throat caught the last rays of sunset, sending prisms of light dancing across the walls like memories taking flight. It's time, she said softly to Alexander, who stood beside her. Elizabeth left one final message for this moment, something she knew we would only be ready to understand now. Marcus and Isabella joined them, along with Dr. Matthews and the core team that had helped transform Richmond Estate from a place of solitary wealth into a sanctuary of healing. Through her unique vision, Hope could see both the present gathering and echoes of similar moments Elizabeth had foreseen, layers of time and love weaving together into something extraordinary. In her final days, Hope began, her voice carrying both youth's clarity and wisdom's depth. Elizabeth discovered something about the nature of memory and love that even she didn't fully understand at first. Something that my mother's research had only begun to explore. She moved to the window, where the garden's evening shadows created patterns like neural pathways across the blooming grounds. They both knew that memories aren't just records of the past, they're seeds of the future. But what they discovered goes deeper than that. Love itself leaves traces not just in our minds, but in the very fabric of reality. Dr. Matthews leaned forward, intrigued. Are you saying that love creates some kind of measurable impact on the physical world? Hope smiled, touching the medallion. More than that. Through my dual vision, I can see what they discovered, that love creates connections that transcend time itself. Every act of genuine love sends ripples both backward and forward, touching lives in ways we're only beginning to understand. She turned to face the gathered group, her green eyes bright, with both present purpose and preserved wisdom. Wellington tried to control memory, to force connections that could only grow naturally. But what Elizabeth and my mother found was something far more powerful. They discovered that love creates its own kind of memory, one that can never be erased or controlled. Alexander watched as his niece moved to Elizabeth's desk, where the original journal lay open to its final pages. Is that what you've been seeing all this time, these connections? Yes, Hope nodded. At first I thought I was just carrying preserved memories, but it's more than that. Every time we help a family heal, every time we restore a broken connection, We're not just fixing the past, we're creating new pathways for love to flow through time itself. She gestured to the garden, where dozens of families who had found healing at Richmond Estate were gathering for the anniversary celebration. Through her extraordinary vision, she could see the web of connections between them, not just present bonds, but echoes of past love preserved and future love waiting to bloom. This is what Elizabeth wanted us to understand, Hope continued. The foundation isn't just about helping people remember or heal. It's about nurturing these natural pathways of love, helping them grow and strengthen until they create their own kind of light. As if in response to her words, the setting sun broke through the clouds, sending sheets of golden light across the estate. Through Hope's dual vision, the light seemed to illuminate not just the physical world, but the invisible connections that bound all their stories together. "Look," she said softly, pointing to where Lily was helping a newly rescued child plant his first memorial flower. "See how the love flows. From Elizabeth's original vision, through all our work here, into futures we can only imagine. It's like a river of light, constantly moving, growing, transforming." Dr. Matthews shook his head in wonder. "All these years studying the science of memory and consciousness, and we never understood that love itself might be the key to understanding it all. Because love can't be measured or controlled," Hope smiled. "It can only be witnessed, nurtured, allowed to grow in its own way and time. That's what Wellington never understood, but Elizabeth and my mother did. They knew that true power lies not in controlling hearts, but in helping them remember how to shine." As darkness fell, the garden blazed with thousands of tiny lights, candles held by every person whose life had been touched by the foundation's work. Through Hope's extraordinary vision, each flame seemed to connect to others, creating a living constellation of healing and hope. "This is our real legacy," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the gathered crowd. "Not just the memories we've preserved or the hearts we've helped heal, but this understanding that love creates its own kind of light, one that shines through all the layers of time, touching every life it meets, growing stronger with each heart that remembers how to shine." She touched the medallion one last time, and in that moment, everyone present seemed to see through her eyes, to witness the magnificent tapestry of love and memory that connected them all, past, present, and future, flowing together in an eternal dance of light and healing. "Elizabeth and my mother gave us the keys to understanding this truth," Hope concluded, her voice soft but carrying clearly through the evening air. "But it's up to all of us to keep nurturing these connections, to keep helping love find its way through time, to keep believing in the power of hearts that refuse to forget how to shine." As the candles flickered in the gathering night, Hope's dual vision showed her one final truth, that their work here would continue to grow and transform, touching lives far beyond Richmond Estate, creating new constellations of healing and hope for generations to come. For in the end, she realized, love itself was the greatest memory of all, a light that could never be extinguished, a truth that would always find its way home, a power that would continue to transform darkness into dawn, one remembering heart at a time. In that moment, past and present merged perfectly in Hope's extraordinary vision, and she saw with absolute clarity that this was not an ending at all. It was simply love's newest beginning, shining ever brighter with each heart that remembered how to glow.